She won the 7-year war against Caracas and was popularly nicknamed the Goddess of War. For her power and courage, she was called the Daughter of the Gods, the rightful monarch of Babylon, Aroa Penril Astrophote. The queen looked hard at her subjects and told them to continue their report. The queen was forced to choose a candidate for her husband. The man looked at the queen and announced the first candidate. Kyle LeBron, currently 34 years old, is the youngest and most emeritus professor in the history of the academy. The man looked at the queen intently and said that Kyle had never been engaged. The queen thought for a moment. He was also called a scholar who represented the intellect of Babylon. The man frowned and said that the first candidate was not interested in women. Looking at the queen, he said that because of this, rumors began to spread that the young man doubted himself as a man. The man looked at the queen with a forced smile and asked how she felt about this option. The queen, in turn, said that she really hates insecure men. Everyone looked at the queen with bated breath, trembling with fear. Looking at the queen, the man said that the second contender is Eve. Tan, currently 26 years old, is an officer in the Capital National Guard. The young man is a bright and optimistic person, looks great, performs his duties well, and has a wide social circle. The man looked intently at the queen and said that the young man was the only heir, and therefore she would not have to worry about relatives. The queen thought about it and said that it seemed like a good option. The man timidly said that, unfortunately, the young man had a fiancé. The queen looked at the courtier in surprise, as she did not expect the young man to have a bride. She asked in bewilderment if they really wanted her to marry someone else's man. The man was taken aback and said that this was not so. He was very nervous looking at the queen and said that he would like to introduce the next candidate. Viperian Blake is a great military leader. He is 29 years old. The queen looked at the male courtier with puzzlement and asked who had recommended him. The man said that his mistress was Jim's best friend. Looking at the queen, he said that the young lady was unofficial, a bride, and her status was different. The queen angrily told him to shut his mouth, as that was not the only problem. She said that the queen's concubines should be further removed from power than anyone else. The young man was from the most powerful noble family. The queen looked closely at all the courtiers and asked if they were really going to live with two rulers. The man timidly asked the queen for permission to introduce the next candidate. Tirana Lasors served as the queen's senior aide, was deputy minister of war, and assisted the senior diplomat. He was called a young political hero, but he also had many political opponents, and he was also the most handsome man in the empire. The man looked timidly at the queen. He saw that she was furious. The man said that the young man had once been the queen's fiancé, but his heart had been broken. The queen, in turn, looked at the young people with a grin. A moment later, she asked angrily if they were making fun of her. She knew her assistants were complete idiots and wondered if she should just kill them all. She looked at them with fury and told them to all leave immediately. Everyone looked closely at the queen and called her, as they had something to discuss. A month ago, at a meeting, politicians said that it was stupid to challenge the queen's authority now, and they needed to keep quiet. They were very surprised that she brought them such a brilliant victory. The Marquis said that some time had passed since the queen's return, and now their future was more important than the past. They were all afraid that power would pass to the queen. They were very worried about this issue, and they were perplexed. They knew that they had to remember about the army, as they had to gather all their forces. The politicians were arguing among themselves continuously. The man looked intently at everyone gathered, and in a trembling voice said that he had an idea. A moment later, he said very loudly that they could force the queen to marry. The politicians looked at the man in bewilderment and asked what he meant. The man looked at the Marquis intently and said that this was a very good idea. He said that she has no lover, and whoever we are in their country, the ruler's partner has no influence. He looked at everyone closely and said that they could put one of their people in that place. He said that several families were already preparing to send a letter to the queen with a proposal, and politicians really liked the idea. The man asked with a grin what kind of man the queen would prefer. She was called a witch and considered the most powerful queen in history. The queen became wary. She did not understand where she was and what sound she was hearing. She was confused, as she was standing in the middle of the battlefield. The maid looked at the queen and, in a trembling voice, said that it was already noon and it was time for her to wake up. The maid said that the chaplain had already visited her several times, and he said that it was very urgent. Aroa looked at them in bewilderment and asked if the queen couldn't even get enough sleep. She didn't understand why they were bothering her. The maids approached the queen with smiles and asked if she would like a massage. The maid smiled, looking at the queen, and asked if they could begin. The queen asked in puzzlement whether her refusal would establish them. The maid told the queen not to say such a thing. The maid smiled and told the queen that they were finished, and the queen said that in that case they could leave. The maids told the queen that they still had some. They should rest a little more. The queen thought that one day she would fire them. The maid told the queen that the chaplain was waiting for her. Aroa told the maid to come in. A moment later, the lord entered the queen's room and greeted her. The queen looked at him intently and asked why he was in such a hurry so early in the morning. She asked if he was planning a coup. The lord was shocked by what he heard. Taken aback, he said that such a thing would never happen. The queen sighed heavily and said that some fools want to do the impossible. He shouted that in that case he was ready to prevent this at the cost of his life. And if some people were disloyal to the queen, then he would wring their necks with his own hand. He shouted that this was the only purpose of his existence. Aroa sighed heavily as she saw that he was going a little too far. She looked at him in surprise and asked what made him hurry so much. The lord sighed heavily and said that those who wanted to marry her had arrived. The queen looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. The lord said that, according to a letter received last night, there were already 38 people asking for her hand. He said that there were envoys from other countries, but he did not dare invite the grooms themselves here, and they were now outside the city. He said that all the proposals were written according to the customs of their empire, but he had prepared a list of candidates. A moment later, the queen picked up the list, and after reading it, she began to laugh hysterically. She looked at the lord intently and asked if they really wanted her to get married. The lord said that was right. She was furious because she knew that her vassals were simply madmen. When an emperor announces his imminent marriage, official letters are sent to all noble families. After this, the nobles select the best candidates and send letters with portraits. This is a normal observance of etiquette. But the young people did not even send notification letters. The request for a hand and heart was so sudden. It was disrespectful to the queen as a woman, to the ruler who was called the goddess of war. The lord asked the queen in a trembling voice which family's proposal she would prefer. The queen looked at everyone present with fury. She was very angry. Those present, in turn, silently trembled from the queen's furious gaze. The queen said that she never imagined that she would miss the battlefield. The handmaid smiled and said that the queen should be here. The queen asked the maids if this didn't irritate them. The maid looked at the queen in bewilderment and asked what she was talking about. The queen told the maid that she could just tie up her hair. The maids hurriedly told the queen that they enjoyed looking after her bright hair. They asked if the queen would like them to style it in a youthful style. The queen looked at them with fury and told them not to even think about it, as she would simply cut them off. The maids were shocked. They did not say that they would not allow her to do this, since her image symbolizes power. The maid looked at the queen and asked what would happen to the ambassadors. The ambassadors looked at the lord intently and said that they would not take a step until they met the queen. The lord looked at them and said that the queen needed rest, as she had just returned from the war. He looked at them and said that they would have an audience with the queen. The ambassadors beamed with happiness. Lor said that, unfortunately, he did not know how long they would have to wait, and the ambassadors were disappointed, as they did not expect to hear such a thing. The Lord looked at the queen and, puzzled, said that today they had received several more letters with an offer. The queen said that she was irritated by the new proposals, and the maid asked in surprise if she was really thinking of rejecting them all. The queen asked if she was really asking her to resign herself to marriage. The maid was taken aback, not knowing what to answer. The queen looked closely into the mirror after all her preparations. She said with a smile that they had done a good job. She said that as maids of the main palace, they do their job very well. After these words were spoken, the maids beamed and thanked the queen for her praise. The queen left the room in a hurry. The maids told her not to miss dinner. The queen mentally asked them for forgiveness, as she had plans for the evening. The knights, in turn, stood guard with honor during the night, and a moment later they saw the queen. The knights stood for a moment in bewilderment, as they saw the state the queen was in. The queen let them go and told them to leave. A moment later, she approached her father's tombstone. Bowing, the queen told her father with a smile that she had won. Throughout the war, she dreamed of saying these words, but when she returned, she was afraid to come to her father. The queen missed her father very much, who was no longer alive. She really wanted to see him again and spend time like she did in childhood. But every time she looks at the grave, she remembers that he is no longer there. She knew that he was the only one who loved and understood her deeply. She knew that now there was absolutely no one left next to her. She wanted her father to drink with her. A moment later, she saw next to the grave a white orchid, a short pipe and leaves of black tea, old wine, and a feather. Yes, she saw leather bracelets and a razor, and a children's novel about heroes. The queen was puzzled, because she knew that her father had liked all these things during his life, but she did not understand where they came from. A moment later, she heard a noise. She thought it was most likely an assassin. The queen said with fury that if he took another step, she would kill him. A moment later, she realized that it was not the killer, but she was still curious about who left the flowers on the grave. A moment later, she ran and shouted at the man to wait. She ran and saw the silhouette, but, unfortunately, not clearly, as she was drunk. The queen ran after the man as fast as she could, but accidentally tripped. A moment later, she grabbed the man, and they fell together. The queen froze as she saw the young man's face clearly. She was shocked as she recognized who it was. She was shocked and didn't understand why he was there, but a moment later, she pushed him away. The young man was in shock. He screamed and called for the queen, but all was in vain. The queen sat down slowly on the ground, as she had a very bad headache. She tried to get up and sighed with relief as she realized she was lucky to be able to move. She looked around in bewilderment. Because she did not understand where she was, she realized that she had fallen off a cliff. The queen looked sideways at the young man. She did not understand why he fell after her. She saw that he had injured his leg. She wondered if he was hurt from falling from such a small height. She thought that he was just weak, since she had a body stronger than ordinary people. She looked closely at the young man and wondered how long it had been since they had seen each other. Aroa looked intently at the young man and asked if he loved her. Cyrano looked closely at the queen. He was surprised by such a question. They had not crossed paths since then. The queen slowly approached the young man and called him. Cyrano looked at her with fury and asked if she had gone mad. The queen looked at him in bewilderment and asked what he was talking about. He asked why she needed to pull him along with her since she was going to fall herself. He said that it was very dangerous. The queen was shocked because she understood that they had not seen each other for a long time, but he had changed a lot and had become more impudent. She knew she had to keep her composure since he had gotten hurt because of her. Aroa asked why he hadn't grabbed onto something. Cyrano said he wouldn't have been able to hold the two of them anyway. She said he was just stupidly trying to catch her. He looked at her and asked if she was suggesting they just let the queen fall off the cliff. Cyrano looked around and said that they had fallen from a very steep slope. There was no path visible. and there was no way to grab onto a tree. Looking at the slope, he said that it was too dangerous to climb it, and it would take the guards some time to find them. The queen was angry with herself, because if she had known that everything would turn out this way, she would not have driven the guards from their post. Cyrano looked at the queen and said that it seemed she was not hurt. The queen was taken aback when she saw that he was having difficulty standing on his feet. She looked at him closely and asked if his leg hurt a lot. The queen came closer to him and said that she could take a look and help. He said that there was no need for that, and she needed to go to the palace and send guards for him. The queen was taken aback and said that his wound was bleeding. He said he could handle it himself. The queen asked angrily, what if he had a broken leg? She asked if he really wanted to remain a colleague forever. He looked at the queen intently and said that she could go and call him a doctor. He said that, fortunately, she was not injured, and if she had died here, there would have been real chaos. Aroa knew that she could easily climb the slope herself. Clutching the tree, she looked at her friend and told him to stay here and she would definitely bring help. She knew that such a hill was no obstacle for her. A moment later, she froze in place from shock. She was shocked and wondered why she suddenly lost her breath. She didn't understand what was happening, as she found it difficult to breathe. The young man looked at the queen in bewilderment. He called her, but there was no answer. The queen was in shock and felt like she was dying. She was furious because she knew she must not show weakness. She knew she had to be perfect in everything, without any weaknesses. The queen called the young man, but told him to stay where he was. She told him to close his eyes and stay put, as this was an order. She knew it shouldn't be this way, and whatever the illness, she would rather die than fall into madness like the previous king. The queen struggled with the pain inside, but she was unable to do so. Cesaro approached the queen and hugged her tightly. He said that everything would be fine. She was very surprised, as she did not expect such a thing. He said that he would definitely help her cope completely. The queen was shocked, as she did not expect to hear such a thing from him, but a moment later, she told him not to tell anyone. The young man said that he would risk his life and would not tell anyone anything. After some time, as they sat silently waiting for the guards, the queen looked at the young man and called him. She asked him if he remembered what happened to the previous king. She said he stopped recognizing people and was always muttering nonsense that didn't make any sense. The young man sighed heavily and said that he remembered it. The queen looked at him, puzzled, and asked what she should do if the same fate befell her. She really wanted to hear the answer of the most talented politician in the entire empire. But in turn, she was very afraid that one day she would go crazy. Cyrano looked closely at the queen and said that everything would be fine. Without taking his gaze off her, he said that she could trust him. Cyrano said that he would not allow this to happen to her. The queen looked at him in surprise, as she did not expect to hear such a thing. A moment later, the queen decided to get up. The young man looked at her in surprise and asked if everything was okay with her. She sighed heavily and said that she was fine. She was just feeling a little sick from a hangover. He sighed heavily as he felt relieved. She said that her body was not harmed, and she was fine. She said that they could move forward, little by little. He looked at her in surprise and asked if she really intended to go. He shouted that she had not yet recovered. She looked at him in bewilderment and said that she had already felt better. He looked at her and told her to wait for him, and he would go and get help. The queen was puzzled, looked at him and asked if he really wanted to go somewhere with such a leg. He looked at her intently and said that it was certainly better than letting her go alone. She looked at him in bewilderment and asked where he was going with such a wound. The queen said she would rather bring help. Cyrano said she could. They had brought unnecessary risk upon themselves, and he would better go. He said he could handle it since the bleeding had stopped and his knees were not damaged. She looked at him intently and told him to stop pretending. Cyrano looked at her in bewilderment and asked what she was talking about. She looked at him with fury and said that she saw everything. Cyrano lowered his gaze to the ground. She asked him why he was so pouty, and asked if it was really hard for him to stand. The queen offered him her help, but the young man refused. The queen was furious and shouted that he was just a stubborn idiot, but a moment later they heard the voices of the guards. The queen looked at them in bewilderment for a moment. Then she shouted. The guard looked down in surprise and shouted as he saw the queen. The advisors present in the hall were a little puzzled, as Her Majesty had not yet returned. Everyone was puzzled, because they did not know where the queen could have disappeared to. No one knew where she was. The Lord was shocked, as he knew that he couldn't just tell the nobles to go home. Everyone present was unhappy because they were kept waiting for a very long time, and it was very rude of the queen. They wanted to go to the queen's inner palace. The Lord said that this was unacceptable, since the inner palace is the queen's personal territory. He said that the queen was not married yet, and they could not just barge into the palace of an unmarried lady. The Marquis said that they were very concerned about the current situation, so they were eager to see the queen. The Lord looked at the Marquis in bewilderment and asked what he was talking about. The Marquis said that their queen was a great guardian of peace. He wondered if in the entire capital there was a person who could brighten up her loneliness. He said that when the queen meets her lover, her loneliness will come to an end, and her subjects will be very happy for her. Everyone present supported him. The Marquis looked intently at the Lord and asked permission to meet their queen. Some time later, the Marquis and a crowd came to the queen's palace and said that they had come for an important discussion. The maid looked at the Lord in bewilderment and asked what kind of a mess they were making. She said that the queen had not returned. The Lord sighed heavily and said that it was hopeless, since they stubbornly stood their ground and demanded a meeting with the queen. The maid looked at the Lord and asked if he didn't know where she might be. They knew what she had been through, and knew that under such conditions it would be difficult for her to return to the palace. Cyrano looked at those present and said that he had a denunciation from the queen. The Lord was shocked and asked where the queen was. He looked at them and said that she intended to calm down the annoying rabble, and therefore everyone was ordered to head to the conference room. Some time later, the maid saw the queen and froze in shock. The maid asked the queen how she was feeling. The queen sighed heavily and said that she felt better than she looked. She looked at the maids and asked if they could get her cleaned up as quickly as possible. The maids looked at the queen in surprise and confusion and said that they would do everything. After a while, the queen shone in all her beauty and thanked the maids with a smile. The queen looked at the Lord and asked if he would be in trouble if she killed everyone present right now. He sighed heavily and asked why she clouded her mind with such trifles. The Lord said that he was only her servant and she was his queen, so she didn't need to worry about such things. She looked at him sharply and said that he should be worried about that, and asked if there were 86 noblemen sitting there. She said that if they didn't have a gun with them, it would be easy to deal with them. She asked the Lord if he wasn't 86 years old. The Lord looked at the queen and told her not to worry about such things and to concentrate on the concerns she already had. The queen looked at him intently and asked if he really wanted her to kill them. She asked if they had really bothered him that much. The Lord, in turn, could not say it out loud. She smiled and said that it seemed to be true. She said that it was all a small matter, since she could cut all their throats so that they would not bother him anymore. She smiled and said that they should still show tolerance today, since killing them all would cause unnecessary trouble. She said with a smile that it was time to calm them down quickly. A moment later, the queen slowly entered the hall, and everyone present knelt before her. The queen, in turn, looked intently at everyone present with a grin. She saw that the scene was very different from the one she had seen before leaving for war. Previously, subjects shouted at the queen that such a decision was contrary to the laws of the royal family. They spoke out against it and said it was simply unacceptable. They told the queen that customs must be respected. She thought that the long war had not been in vain, as she saw how they all now humbly bowed their heads before her. The queen looked intently at all her subjects and ordered them to raise their heads. The men slowly carried out the queen's order and also thanked her. The queen looked at those present with a grin and said that the atmosphere seemed to have changed very much. She asked if they had attended etiquette classes together. The men hesitated but did not answer. A moment later, the Marquis turned to the queen and asked her to take the document. She looked at him in surprise and asked what was in the document. The Marquis said that he would like her to look at the list of candidates. The Marquis looked intently at the queen and asked her to choose a new king. She looked at him with fury and asked if she had heard everything correctly. The Marquis said that everything was exactly as he had said earlier. The Marquis looked at her intently and asked her to choose a new king, a father for her children. He said that the position of king cannot be allowed to remain empty. He said that she had finally returned from the war, and now she needed to pursue the right policy. He begged her to choose a legal husband for herself. The queen looked at them with fury, as she saw that they were arbitrarily trying to appoint a partner for their ruler. The man said that if she did not fulfill her duties as a royal, the future of the country could be at risk. They said that it was the queen's duty to establish strong roots for the royal family. She understood that they wanted to say that if she did not give birth to a child, she did not even dare to call herself a queen. She saw their intentions. Now that the war was over, they saw her as a vessel for the birth of a new king. But the last years had not been in vain for her. The queen looked at them intently and laughed with a grin, asking if this was really their list of candidates. The Marquis looked closely at the queen and said that everything was exactly so, since they were all members of families that were part of the nobility. The queen looked at the list of contenders with fury. The lord could see that the queen was furious. He wondered if she intended to kill them all. The queen quietly told the lord to remember the faces of everyone present. The lord sighed heavily and agreed with the queen. The queen looked at them with fury and told them to go away, as she would decide everything later. The aristocrats present disagreed with her, as they wanted to resolve the issue as quickly as possible. She looked at them with fury and asked if she really should give birth to their heir right here, so that they would shut up. Everyone would freeze in shock. The lord, in turn, understood that a storm would soon begin. Cyrano returned home and thought about the current situation. He remembered how the queen suddenly clutched her heart. The young man remembered that the previous king had the same disease. He sighed heavily as he realized that this disease was different. He wondered what could have caused her to become so suddenly ill, and a moment later he realized that it was the war. The man was puzzled because he did not understand how they could defeat a powerful country. Cyrano looked at the man and said that it seemed like he had forgotten that they had a goddess of war, Cyrano, the man who had encouraged her to go to the front lines. Aroa asked with a smile if he would say that he would miss his beloved. She asked what kind of groom he was if he couldn't even say something like that. He looked at her intently and said that she must destroy Caracas so that they could not recover for a long time. He asked her to win the war and return back. The young man was furious because he understood that he was the only one to blame for everything. Cyrano, the young man, and asked where his grandfather was. The youth said that the Duke was now in the kitchen. Cyrano slowly walked into the kitchen and asked his grandfather if he was baking bread again. The Duke looked closely at his grandson and said that he had guessed wrong, since today he would be baking sweets. The young man looked at his grandfather with puzzlement. He told his grandfather that he had taken not confectionery flour, but noodle flour. The Duke asked in surprise if it wouldn't be suitable for desserts. Cyrano said that the package said the flour was for noodles. The Duke looked at the package containing this information in surprise. Cyrano sighed heavily and said that similar age takes its toll. The Duke looked at his grandson with anger and said that he was an impudent scoundrel. The Duke asked his grandson what was wrong with his leg and where he had been all night. Cyrano said that he had simply fallen. The Duke said he felt bad when his grandson left, but he felt even worse now that he had returned. He looked at his grandson with anger and asked why he had come to see him again. The Duke sighed heavily and said that he believed his grandson was still in love with the queen, and if rumors were to be believed, she had never had anyone before. Cyrano said that several years had already passed, and the queen was no longer the same person. He told his grandfather that he should understand this himself. The Duke sighed heavily and said that everything was correct, and he, of course, understood him. He asked his grandson to sit down. Cyrano looked closely at his grandfather and said that they were no longer children, and no one in their time played this game anymore. The Duke sighed heavily and said that the point of the game was only to win, lose, and have fun while doing it. Cyrano looked intently at his grandfather and said that it was his turn now. The Duke thought for a moment. The Duke slowly reached out to the structure. His hands trembled. Cyrano called his grandfather. The Duke looked at him with fury and told him to shut up, as he could sort it out himself. The young man asked if the Duke remembered the symptoms that the previous king had experienced before he went mad. But a moment later, the structure collapsed, and the Duke was furious. He asked if he really intended to start talking so that he would lose. Cyrano looked at him and asked him to answer the question. The Duke looked at his grandson in surprise and asked why he suddenly became interested in this question. The young man said that, unfortunately, he could not name the reason, but he would like to hear about everything. The queen was furious, as she knew that insomnia was her nasty affliction. She knew that during the war she could fall asleep instantly, even sitting in a tree. She wondered why she couldn't sleep in a comfortable bed. She thought that perhaps it was because of those annoying cretins who started bothering her immediately after her return. She was furious because she wanted to quickly gather them all together and just burn them. She understood that in that case, everyone would consider her a mad queen. Aroa suddenly remembered Cyrano. She was sure that he would keep everything a secret. He was the one she could trust the most in the entire empire. The queen was furious, as she knew she needed something to drink to forget. She was puzzled and didn't know what to choose. She looked at the drink with a frown. A moment later, she heard some noise. Aroa was a little surprised. Turning around, she looked closely at the man who entered her room. She wondered if he was the killer. She was a little surprised and wondered if he really intended to fight her in such a bulky outfit. She saw that he didn't look like a murderer, but she didn't understand what he was doing. She thought that she should still scream out of politeness. The queen looked intently at the young man who began to undress. She looked at the young man in surprise. She didn't understand what was going on at all. Aroa S. found the situation very funny, as a cute guy snuck into her room in the middle of the night and took off his cape. She knew that such a slender body and smooth skin without a single hair was popular among girls. The queen looked at the young man intently and told him to stand where he was. She asked him what he was thinking. The young man was taken aback, not knowing what to answer. He was trembling with fear. She looked at him intently and asked who he was. The young man looked at the queen with confusion. He did not know how to explain himself to her. She came closer to him and told him not to move. She asked with a smirk if he was even wearing makeup. The queen asked if he had really come to her in such a guise to kill her. The young man was taken aback. He fell to his knees and said that this was not so. She looked at him with fury and asked if he had come to her in the hope that he would be able to seduce her. The young man trembled with fear and begged the queen to have mercy on him. The queen looked at him in bewilderment and asked his name. The young man was trembling with fear. He said his name was Snow. He said that unfortunately he had no last names. The queen looked at him intently and told him to raise his head immediately. With tears in his eyes, he looked at her. She asked him angrily why he had come to her, since he was so scared that he was ready to cry. Snow was trembling and saying that he was very sorry. He begged for forgiveness. The queen asked who ordered him to sneak into her chambers. She asked angrily if they really thought she would fall for his pretty face and make him her lover. She looked at him with fury and said that even though he was young, he would never be forgiven. He shouted that she was right and he deserved to die, but he still asked to be pardoned this time. The queen was puzzled. She did not know what was the right thing to do with the young man. A moment later, there was a knock at the queen's door. Tess said that she had come to see her. The queen sighed heavily and said that she could come in. The queen looked at her intently and told her to come into her room. Tess looked at the queen in bewilderment. The queen said that she should go to her room and come back to her. The maids, in turn, whispered quietly, as they were curious about what had happened. A moment later, a scream came from the queen's chambers, and the queen asked, puzzled, if she had really hit him. Tess fell to her knees and screamed at the queen that they deserved to die. A moment later, all the maids were on their knees, saying that it was entirely their fault, as they had failed to ensure the queen's safety. Tess asked the queen to behead her and all the guards standing guard. The queen sighed heavily and asked her to calm down. Tess said that it couldn't just be left like that. She couldn't understand who would come up with something like that. The queen said with a smile that in their eyes she was a woman who was thirsty for sexual pleasure, and perhaps they thought she was starved for the opposite sex. She said that they were well aware of her long-standing adventures, and despite the fact that the war was over, she had to be on guard. Tess asked the queen for permission. She wanted to kill that man and flay him, and then she needed to catch everyone involved. The queen knew it would be much easier to simply hunt them all down and get rid of them. She knew she must not pursue a bloody policy. The queen looked closely at the maid and told her not to tell anyone and to bring the head butler. The lord looked at the queen and said that he thought it would be wise to turn a blind eye to the incident. The lord looked at the maid and told her to order her maids to keep their mouths shut. Tess was shocked by this order. The butler said that this man needed to be locked in a secluded place of the palace. The butler said that he would certainly interrogate the young man personally later. The butler said angrily that, judging by the appearance of the young man, he was just someone's puppet who was being manipulated. Looking at the young man, the butler said that until the investigation was completed, he should be left, and then it would be easier for them to decide what to do with him. The queen looked closely at the maid and told her to do everything as the head butler ordered. The butler told the queen that he didn't think it would stop there, and the queen said with a grin that she knew about it. Sometime later, a meeting of members of noble families was organized. The queen looked at them in surprise and asked the cheese since when only blondes could participate in noble meetings. The man told the queen that these children were all heirs of noble families. The queen looked at them with fury and said that even allowing bribes would have been a more sensible law. The aristocrats looked closely at the queen and said that they were doing everything only for the good of the queen and the kingdom. The queen asked angrily if all this was really for her. A moment later, she called for the butler. She looked at them with a smirk and told her butler to choose one person to be her forehead protector. Everyone present looked at the queen, puzzled and shocked. They did not expect to hear such a thing. The aristocrats were shocked and shouted to the queen that it was impossible to act the way they had gathered at this important meeting. They shouted that she should not take the matter so lightly, and the queen looked at them with a grin as they became very animated. She looked at them with fury, without asking if they really thought her choice was frivolous. The queen looked at the man and told him to choose a concubine for her. The man looked at the queen with confusion and asked why he should do that. She looked at him with a smirk and asked if he really didn't have the guts. The man was shaking with fear. The queen looked at the aristocrats with fury and asked if they were really going to teach her how to behave. The man was taken aback and told the queen that they would never do that. She asked the marquis why he thought she had spent so much time on the battlefield. She asked if he had taken part in any battle. The man was taken aback, and the queen said with a grin that he had never taken part in a single battle. The man, with a trembling voice, said that he was sorry and begged to forgive his stupidity. She looked at them intently and said that she wanted to tell them an interesting story. She said that on the border near the southern ridge, the life of a private soldier had been ingloriously extinguished. She asked if they wanted to know why this had happened. She said that the poor guy had no idea that his portion of food had long since gone bad, and because of this, he became very ill and could not even stand his post. His last wish was to go to the front lines at least once, riding a fine stallion. The queen looked at the Marquis with fury and asked if he did not find this amusing. She asked if he should not take on the role that the soldier dreamed of. The Marquis trembled with fear, she said. The young man had not been trained in how to sit properly in the saddle or hold a spear. She said that he sought death on the battlefield, not in bed. The queen said that the young man's name was Miriam, and they should remember this name well. She said that while they were getting drunk and filling their stomachs with delicious food, ordinary soldiers were dying because they got spoiled food. The Duke followed the queen. He looked at her and called out. The Duke asked how the story ended. The queen looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. The Duke asked the queen if she would allow him to make his dream come true. The queen looked at the Duke with fury and asked him if he really thought she had agreed to such an absurd request. The Duke said he was sure the queen had listened to his request. She sighed heavily and said she was not so responsive. The Duke, puzzled, said that he would still like to know the truth. He asked if she would like to tell him about the ending. The queen said that she was very tired and did not want to talk about anything else. The maids looked closely at the queen and asked with a smile if she would like to take a hot bath. The queen said that she had already washed her hands and asked if she smelled of something. The maid, puzzled, said that she did not mean that. The queen looked at the maids and said that they were free and told them to bring her something to drink. Aroa was furious. She didn't know what to do with the aristocrats. She knew that Cyrano would definitely advise her on many punishments for the aristocrats, as he was an expert in humiliating and mocking the nobles. She knew that if he had not been her ex-lover, she would now have chosen him as her husband. The young man thought for a moment. He said that he had indeed taken part in that. He said that it was very strange, since there had been such a grand battle, but he could not remember. A moment later, he said that he remembered that battle. The Duke looked at the young man expectantly, as he wanted to know the rest of the story. The young man timidly said that that was all. The Duke looked at the young man with puzzlement and asked if Miriam had never existed. He asked if Her Highness simply wanted to fool 200 nobles. The young man looked at the Duke in surprise and said that there really was a soldier with that name. He said that the queen had fulfilled his wish. The Duke looked at the young man in surprise and asked if that guy had really died that same day. The young man said that that was not true. The Duke looked at the young man in surprise. The young man said that the soldier mounted the largest horse and rushed into battle. He said that Her Majesty allowed him to ride with her on one horse. The men were perplexed, as they did not expect to hear such a thing. The young man said that since he was protected by the queen herself, he was able to take part in the battle and return alive, and was later well patched up. The Duke was furious because he realized that they had been fooled again. The Duke looked at his grandson with fury and said that the queen simply wanted to laugh at him. Cyrano looked at his grandfather in surprise and asked if the queen had really called 200 nobles to mock him personally. He looked closely at his grandfather and asked how the queen was feeling. The Duke sighed heavily and said that this time everything had gone smoothly, but a queen without heirs could not be recognized. Cyrano sighed heavily and said that the queen was still alone. The Duke said that everything was correct and that at the moment her popularity was at its peak. He said that the queen's marriage was a different matter entirely, as it was not a question of whether it was right or wrong. He said that the whole kingdom was waiting for her to continue her line. Cyrano said that they would use a man from a noble family and try to take the most advantageous position possible. The Duke said that everything was correct, and the longer they delayed, the greater the tension would be. He said that a full-scale competition had begun for the place of Her Majesty's groom. The Duke looked at his grandson and told him not to rock the boat. He said that even if Her Majesty rejected him, they would not take their eyes off him. After all, his status as the queen's former lover had not gone away. He remembered how the queen had once asked him if he loved her. The queen had looked intently at her fiancé and said that she was going off to war. Then she asked if he wanted to say goodbye. She looked at him in surprise and said that he was a lousy groom. He looked closely at his grandfather and said that everything was fine, since he was not afraid of them. The Duke sighed heavily and, looking at his grandson, said that he knew it. The Duke looked closely at his grandson and asked what he intended to do after his death. The Duke asked him if he wanted to become Lord Truven or if he wanted to remain Cyrano Lesors. The young man sighed heavily, but did not answer. The Duke looked at his grandson with fury and said that he would not pass on the title to him, and even he did not have to think about it. The Duke looked at his grandson intently and said that he was the worst bastard in the whole world. Cyrano looked at the Duke intently and asked if that was the reason he had adopted another child. Cyrano looked at the Duke intently and told him to stop swearing. The Duke looked at his grandson with fury and told him to shut his mouth and go to bed immediately. The young man sighed heavily because he knew that everything happened because of him. Cyrano knew that he was to blame, since the war had started because of him. He knew that if there was even the slightest hope of redeeming himself, he would do anything. The maid looked at the queen intently and called her. She said that it was already morning and she needed to get ready. The queen said angrily that she did not want to go anywhere. The maid bowed and told the queen that the chaplain was waiting for her. Aroapi thought that another batch of marriage proposals had arrived. She said angrily that they didn't seem to know when to stop. She asked angrily how many times they had already sent her letters. The queen looked at the maids with fury and told them to carry them to her. The queen scoffed, because she liked the way the letters with proposals burned. The queen said with a smirk that they should learn to save paper. The lord was shocked by the queen's actions. The queen said with a grin that she would rather live alone than with any of them. The lord fell on his knees and called the queen. She looked at him in bewilderment. The lord said that he was already 86 years old. He was very grateful that she allowed him, an old man, to stand next to her for a very long time. The queen looked at him in surprise and asked why he was suddenly behaving like this. The lord said that Her Majesty is called the greatest monarch in their history. He said that his pathetic body has little time left. The queen was taken aback and came closer to him. She did not understand what had come over him. The lord looked at her closely and said that he had been told that she had insomnia and that it was very difficult for her to fall asleep without alcohol. He asked if she really felt lonely and scared. He said that the queen's loneliness was an affliction that even hundreds and thousands of subjects could not eclipse. The queen looked closely at the lord and with a soft smile said that she was fine. The lord looked at her intently and said that so many kings and emperors had listened to the whispers of their lovers. He asked if she knew why this happened. The queen looked at him in surprise as she was at a loss. The lord looked at the queen intently and asked her to hear his last request. He said that she had spent a long time on the battlefield and that only her lover could give Her Majesty peace and satisfaction. He said that her loneliness had even deprived her of sleep, and he wished her all the best. The queen looked at him intently and said that she was not celibate. She said that in any case, she did not want to marry a man who was very infatuated with her. The lord looked closely at the queen and said that these were very wise words. The lord said that up until now she had protected their empire, but now he prayed for her to find someone who could protect her as well. The queen looked at him intently and said with a soft smile that he was right. The lord looked at the queen in surprise and asked if what she was saying was true. He asked if she was joking. He was very worried that she might change her mind and go on a long campaign again. Aroa smiled and said that it was in her best interest to get married, so she would do so. She said that he did not need to worry, as within this year she would already introduce her groom to him. The lord was very surprised and at the same time wounded. He bowed to the queen with a radiant smile. Aroa said that sooner or later she would find a man who could fill the void in her heart. The lord bowed and said that Her Majesty would definitely meet the man she needed. The queen knew that there were many wonderful men in their empire, and it would not be difficult. She looked closely at the lord and said that a foreigner would not suit her, since the man must necessarily come from their empire. He must also be in good physical condition and have a penchant for learning. She said that he should be the only child in the family, and the older sons would not do. he should be a warrior who is not afraid of difficulties. The Lord wrote down all her wishes. The queen said that one who is too rash would not do either. She hated whining, and so she said that the candidate should not irritate people with empty chatter. The queen thought for a moment and said that she hated people who were too closed off. She said that she doesn't like those who can't drink, and long hair won't do either. She said that at such a moment it might turn out that her wife would be even more feminine than she. The queen said that she didn't like too big an age difference. The Lord looked closely at the queen and asked if there were any other preferences. The queen said of course there was. The queen said she didn't mind drooping eyelids, but she didn't like bulbous noses, and he shouldn't be too hairy. The queen said that she does not like a man who snores or sleeps a lot. The voice should not be too loud, not too thin or mumbling. She said that she does not mind if he is tall, but the shoulders must be broad. The Lord was shocked. The queen looked at him intently and asked if he hadn't written it down. The queen said the candidate must be able to control his emotions. His outlook should be as broad as the ocean, but his demeanor should be calm, like a gentle breeze in the field. She said that he should not smack his lips while eating, should respect all his subjects, should not demand that the maids help him wash in the bathroom, and should not behave provocatively. The Lord wrote down all the queen's wishes. The young man looked at the queen intently and asked if there was anyone who fit all her criteria. He asked if the head butler really believed that. He said that it was not even difficult to guess that the queen did not want to marry anyone at all. She looked at him in surprise and asked why he thought so. The queen said that suddenly someone might be found, and he should still be more optimistic in this situation. The young man asked if the butler had really decided to carry out this order. He did not understand how one could find a person who did not exist. The queen said that passion and responsibility burned in the Lord, and she only gave him the opportunity to try. The queen said that he was the man who was more worried about her than anyone else in their country. The young man looked at the queen closely and said that if he were in her place, he would be more vigilant. She looked at him in surprise, as she did not understand what he was talking about. He said that if Lord S.'s motivation was her order, then the situation could turn in a different direction. He said that the Lord could even summon the demon king himself to fulfill his duty. The queen looked at the young man intently and said with a smirk that if that was the case, she would have to marry the demon king. Reread the entire list in surprise and bewilderment. He was very surprised by the queen's demands. The duke looked at the head butler and asked if compiling a long list meant that the queen simply did not want to get married. The butler said that he also thought so. The duke asked in surprise and confusion what they should do about it. The Lord said that they needed to find suitable ones from humans. The duke asked in bewilderment if anyone could handle something that even the head butler could not handle. Lore said that the duke could handle, for example, the difficult task of Dana. The duke looked at the Lord with fury and said that if he had awakened her to this, then he could at least take responsibility for it. He said that after all, Her Majesty was not some pathetic girl, and she would survive even if she did not find a suitable man. The duke sighed heavily and said that if she was lucky enough to find someone, she should make him her husband. The Lord looked at the duke with fury and said that it was irresponsible on his part. He asked how he still managed to hold the title of duke. They glared at each other angrily for a while. The duke sighed heavily and said that, in any case, he would not be able to help in this situation, and he would have to look for solutions himself. The Lord looked at the duke and said that Serrano would do. Lesores, the duke looked at the Lord in surprise and asked, what does his grandson have to do with it? He said that their marriage had been annulled long ago. The Lord sighed heavily and said that he knew about it. The duke looked at the head butler with anger and said that those two had long ago broken all ties, and he did not want to drag out this story even further. He wanted to close this topic. The duke sighed heavily and said sadly that, no matter what they did, they would not be able to restore the broken relationship. He said that this was only an invasion of someone else's life. The Lord said that they needed to return everything to the way it was, and the duke must understand this too. The duke said that he did not understand anything. The Lord looked closely at the duke and said that his grandson was the man the queen needed. The duke sighed heavily and, looking away from his old friend, said that he had previously thought the same. He said that, as a citizen of his country, he wished the queen happiness. The Duke sighed heavily and said that his grandson was the only child left in his family. The Duke said that, to tell the truth, he did not wish to do anything that might upset Her Majesty. The Lord looked closely at the departing Duke and said that he thought it would be right to take his grandson's opinion into account and not just draw conclusions. Lord said that he would not put any pressure on the young man. The Duke looked at his friend with fury and told him not to even dare to start such a conversation. The Duke said that his grandson was not a knight. He did not grow up in Babylon because he studied abroad. He does not tolerate alcohol at all, and he also has a very bad temper. In addition, his hair is very long and he is not suitable. The Lord looked at the Duke with fury and asked if he thought he did not know this. The young man looked at his grandfather in surprise and asked what had happened. The Duke looked at his grandson with fury and said that from that day on he would take great care of his face in order to whiten it. Cyrano looked at his grandfather in bewilderment, as he did not understand what he was talking about. Looking at his grandson, the Duke told him not to cut his hair, as it needed to be grown as long as possible. He shouted that he should grow his hair down to his knees if necessary. Cyrano looked at the Duke with bewilderment. He was puzzled by his words. The Duke was very angry. He looked intently at his grandson and shouted that he knew what was fashionable in the capital now, and he must follow fashion. The young man looked at his grandfather in surprise and asked why he had suddenly started talking about such things. The Duke told his grandson to stop mumbling and start doing everything as he was told. The Duke handed the folded list to his grandson. The young man approached Cyrano and asked what could have upset the Duke so much. Cyrano sighed heavily and said that he didn't even know. The Queen looked at the Lord intently and asked with a smile if there were really only 4 people. She asked with a grin if she could really choose one of the 4 offered. The Lord looked closely at the Queen and said with a smile that everything was exactly like that. Aroa was surprised, but with a smile she said that he had done a very good job. The Queen smiled and said that a meeting of all the nobility should be held, as she would like to see the candidates for herself. First on the list of candidates was the excellent scientist Kyle LeBron. Second on the list is the radiant and cheerful Avetan, is a sociable person and has a bright personality. The third Viperian Blezhike is a wonderful knight and military leader. And also didn't forget to mention Cyrano La Sorsa. The man trembled with fear when he said her name. The Queen frowned as she looked at the list of candidates, as among them were 2 of the Queen's old acquaintances. The first is the lover of her good friend. The second is her ex-lover. Lore said that the young man turned 29 this year. He has extensive experience as an assistant to Her Majesty. During the war, he was the Minister of Finance, and for a time he was also a senior diplomat. Although he is called a young genius of diplomacy, he also has many political enemies who do not support his unconventional views. The man looked at the Queen timidly, as he was afraid to speak further. But a moment later, he said that in the past, the young man had been Her Majesty's lover, but that marriage had been annulled. The Queen looked at everyone present with fury. A moment later, she stood up and asked angrily if they were making fun of her. She knew her assistants were complete idiots and wondered if she should just kill them all now. She looked at them with fury and said that the hearing was over. The Queen decided to leave, but her assistants called her. Aroa was furious and did not understand why everything was going this way. The Queen angrily asked the Lord if he had really decided to play a joke on her. The Lord looked at the Queen in bewilderment and asked what she was talking about. She looked at the Lord and said that this was simply unacceptable, since Cyrano and Viprion could not become her lovers. The Lord looked at the Queen intently and, holding the list closer to her, asked her to look at it. He said that this was all he asked. She asked angrily if he had really decided to change the subject. She asked if he was laughing at her. Lore said that from the moment he set foot within the walls of this palace, there was not a single day when he did not risk his life. He said that she might find his actions too impudent, but before she killed him, he asked her to read the document. She looked at him with fury and asked what he was, she said. She did not understand why she suddenly needed to kill him. She asked if he really saw her as a mad queen. The Lord looked at the queen intently and said with a smile that he had prepared enough copy. The queen took the list and headed for the exit. She was furious, as she knew that the Lord was just a stubborn old man. The maids looked at the queen intently with smiles, asked if she was hungry, and they also wanted to know if she wanted them to give her a massage. The queen looked at the maids intently and said that she needed to think about something. She asked them not to bother her. Tess, looking after the queen, said that they needed to make secret preparations. She told her maids to pretend that they did not serve in the palace and to head to Prosperous Street. The maid looked at Madame in surprise. Tess told the maid that everything was correct and she would stumble upon the popular Salute pub there. Tess looked sharply at the maids and told them to get everything done as quickly as possible. The queen, in turn, stood on the balcony and pondered this situation. Tess came closer to the queen and looked at her with a puzzled expression, saying that she looked worried. The queen sighed heavily and said that it was so. Tess S. told the queen that food and wine had long been served. Aroa sighed and said that she would go and eat a little later. Tess, looking at the queen, said that Isabel Salute would soon arrive to her. The queen was surprised, as she did not expect to hear such a thing. She did not understand why her friend should suddenly come to her. Tess said with a smile that to be honored with the opportunity to drink with Her Majesty in person, one must be able to sing the best in all Babylon. Sometime later, the young lady entered the queen's room and said with a smile that she smelled a wonderful scent. The queen looked closely at the young lady and said that she had rushed towards her quite quickly. Isabel smiled as she looked at the queen and asked if this was her wonderful night. The queen looked closely at the young lady and said that she would have to change her perfume because the smell was just awful. Isabel smiled and said that she would never do that because she really loved the smell of roses. Isabel looked at the queen in surprise and asked why she seemed so worried. The queen was puzzled and said that she had to choose one of 4 husband candidates. Isabel looked at the queen in surprise and asked if she really had to choose from 4. The queen looked at her in surprise and asked if it wouldn't be more correct to say just 4. Isabel looked at the queen closely and said that she was sure that there would be only 2 of them. She said that only Cyrano and Viperion were suitable for this role. The queen looked at the young lady closely and said that she still had the courage to propose her own lover as a husband. Isabel said that she never accepted his love, and besides, they are not even married. Isabel said she was just a girl from the pub, and Viperion was the heir to the ancient Blake family. Isabel looked closely at the queen and asked with a smile who the candidates were. The queen sighed heavily and told her friend that she had guessed 2 of them correctly, but she didn't know the other 2. Isabel smiled and said that there was a commotion throughout the city, and in every tavern they were discussing and making bets on who would become her husband. Isabel smiled and said that it was very funny that every time they mentioned Cyrano most often. The queen looked at her friend in bewilderment and asked what was wrong. Isabel said that even though they had separated, he was still a good candidate. The queen thought for a moment and said that she had recently met him. Isabel was surprised as she did not expect to hear such a thing. A moment later, her expression changed and, looking at the queen, she asked how everything had gone. The queen looked at her friend in bewilderment and asked what she was talking about. Isabel said that they had not seen each other for a long time and asked the queen what she could tell about him. The queen thought for a moment and said that the atmosphere had been very awkward. The elector asked, "Is it really so, even after all this time?" The queen asked in surprise, "Is it really supposed to be any different?" The young lady said that usually after a few years the past is easily forgotten. Isabel asked the queen if there was not great love between the 2 of them. Isabel asked if they were now just a ruler and a subordinate. The queen sighed heavily and said that everything was correct. The young lady thought for a moment and said that if it wasn't some kind of tragic breakup, then they should think it over carefully. Isabel said that they would not only feel interest, as at the first meeting, but also comfort, since they had known each other for a long time. The queen said that the young man was embarrassed to see her and was starting to get angry because he couldn't even find the words. The young lady looked at the queen intently and asked with a smile what about her. The queen said that it was also difficult for her to say anything, since all her thoughts immediately became clouded. The young lady smiled at the queen and said that Tuki Tuki was still there. The queen looked at her friend in bewilderment, as she did not understand what she was talking about. Isabel looked at the queen intently and said that she needed to go on a date. Aroa looked at her with bewilderment, as she did not understand what she was talking about. Isabel asked the queen to go on a date and have a good rest. She said that she was talking about those candidates. Isabel said that this doesn't just apply to people she doesn't know. She said that it applies to Cyrano and Viperion. Isabel smiled and told the queen to think of them all as new acquaintances. Isabel asked the queen to evaluate them objectively. Isabel told the queen to remember to ask herself whether she could spend her entire life with this person. The queen sighed heavily and said that she understood her. Isabel looked at the queen intently and asked with a smile if she could promise her worthless friend something. Aroa looked at her friend in surprise and asked what promise they were talking about. Isabel smiled and refilled the queen's glass of wine, telling her to be honest. The queen looked at the young lady with puzzlement and said that she was always honest. The young lady looked at the queen with a smile and said that she was lying. Aroa P. looked at her friend and said that she was just an impudent girl. Aroa said that she was still the queen. Isabel smiled, looking at the queen, and asked how she could forget about this. Isabel told the queen that she was the only person she respected in all of Babylon. The queen looked at her friend with a smile and said that they could drink to that. The young lady smiled and said that they would only have one glass. Sometime later, Isabel Yu was carried out of the palace, as she was unfortunately unable to move on her own. The maids, in turn, slowly laid the queen down. The queen looked at her subordinates intently and said that she would go on a date. They looked at her in surprise, but were still very happy with this decision of their ruler. Aroa looked closely at Tess and asked if the young man was really 34 years old. Tess said that was correct. The queen asked if he was not a nobleman. Tess S. said that he came from a wealthy family, but gave up his title and became a professor at the academy. The queen asked in surprise if there were other similar cases. Tess S. said that nothing like this had ever happened, and in the entire history of the academy he was the first person like this. The queen asked in surprise what he was studying. Tess S. said the man was studying foreign policy analysis. Tess? She glanced sideways at the maids as she saw that they had prepared dresses for the queen, but a moment later she gave them a signal and they put the dress away. The queen looked closely at her maid and asked how he had reacted to the demands for a meeting with the queen. Tess S. said that the young man had said that if he wanted to politely decline the marriage, he should meet Her Majesty in person. The queen laughed and said with a smile that he was a very cheeky guy. Tess looked at the queen in surprise and asked why she chose the Siori Palace. The queen smiled at Tess and said that the palace had a very beautiful garden and that many roses bloomed there every summer. The man looked intently at the queen and led her to the candidate. Kyle looked at the queen in surprise and intently. The young man froze, looking at the queen, as he did not expect to see her so quickly. A moment later, he greeted the queen according to all the rules of etiquette. She looked at him intently and said with a smirk that it was very tasteless, since, after all, it was a normal meeting. He looked at her in surprise and asked with a smile what he should say. The queen smiled and said that they could put it off until later, and asked why they didn't go for a walk. The young man smiled and said that it was a great honor for him. He slowly took the queen's hand. Cyrano read an article that criticized the views on the power of the first king and Her Majesty. He did not even doubt that the author would be the same unknown writer. He was surprised, because he saw a clear handwriting and objective views. And yet he saw that in this bold article there was not a drop of respect for the crown. The Lord said angrily that he had already read it, and the first time he had a similar impression. But after reading it a second and third time, he felt a certain difference. The Lord asked Cyrano if he had noticed it. The young man said that by hiding everything under criticism of the crown, she was ridiculing the nobles. The Lord looked at the young man and told him to read something else. Cyrano was surprised because the unknown author compared the meeting of the aristocrat with a raid of lousy dogs. He wrote that if they took part in the war, then all the enemies would die of laughter. Cyrano knew that a similar message was conveyed in many other articles. He understood that if the author's name was known, he would have been gotten rid of long ago. Cyrano said that he would pray that he could continue to hide under a pseudonym. He knew that the author was Kyle LeBron. The Lord sighed heavily and said angrily that it would not be easy, since they had announced a very high reward. Cyrano looked at the Lord in surprise and said that he believed the nobles themselves had done it. He asked how high the reward had been announced for him. The Lord said that they would pay 100,000 in gold to anyone who revealed the true identity of the author, and the back alley was already full of such announcements. The queen and her companion strolled leisurely around the garden's environs. The queen looked closely at the young man and asked if he was interested in why the vegetation in this garden was so low. He looked closely at the queen and said that Her Majesty had spent her childhood in Siori Palace, and he believed that the gardener had done so because of her age. He said that it was all for her, since no one wanted the princess to get hurt. The queen looked at her companion with a smile and said that this was partly true. She looked intently at the young man, and the suit said that she should have seen everyone. He looked at her in surprise and asked what she was talking about. The queen said that she had to see everyone and everything around her. She needed to know who was sneaking up on her and what was happening behind her, because she needed to look around to ensure her own safety. She smiled and said that when she was 11 years old, she gathered all the gardeners and ordered them to cut down all the plants that were taller than her. Kyle looked at the queen intently and said that he now realized that there was more to it than just a romantic message. The queen looked closely at the young man and asked with a smile if he really expected romance. She told him with a smile not to even try to deny it. The young man hesitated, not knowing what to answer, and timidly moved away from her. The queen looked at the young man with a smile and asked for forgiveness. She said that she did not mean to upset him at all, since she was trying to be honest with him. He timidly turned his gaze away from her and said that she didn't need to apologize to him at all. The queen said that if they became husband and wife, there would be a celebration today, and then this place would become their romantic corner. He looked at her in surprise and shock, as he was shocked by her words. Kyle asked if she was really talking to him seriously now. The queen looked at him with a smile, as she did not understand why he was reacting to her words like that. She said that they were on a date now. The queen said with a smile that, if everything went well, they would really get married. Kyle looked at the queen with surprise and confusion and called her. The queen smiled and said that he could be honest with her. She looked at him intently and asked when he was told that he could be one of the candidates. What was his reaction to the offer given to her? Kyle looked at the queen intently and puzzled, said that he was very surprised. Aroa looked closely at the young man and smiled and told him to repeat it, as she had told him to be honest. Kyle said that he had been told that an invitation had come from the palace. He said that he did not know whether she knew or not, but rumors spread quite quickly in the academy, and the children enjoyed it. She looked at him in surprise and asked if the rumors about their meeting had spread throughout the academy because of one invitation. He smiled and said that when he returned, no one knew yet that the queen was choosing a husband for herself. However, they soon received a telegram right at the door of his laboratory. The queen said that it seemed that complete chaos had begun. Kyle said that at first he himself didn't believe it. He timidly said that being chosen to be the queen's husband was a very important thing. He said that he thought it was a joke by the students, so he threw them out. He looked at her intently and said that he was not the one for this role. The queen looked at the young man with a smile on her face. Kyle sighed heavily and said that he was not such a great man. Cyrano looked at the Lord and asked if they were really ready to pay such a fabulous sum for his capture. He said that it seemed like they were seriously taking on his capture. The Lord sighed heavily and said that everything was correct. Lore said that, as they can see, he continues to write the truth, and many people support him. Cyrano S. said that everything was correct, and it seemed that the nobles were seriously worried. Cyrano said that he was a professor who wanted to recreate a picture of the ideal world. The queen looked closely at her companion and said with a smile that she had been very interested in life at the academy. She asked him why he did not ask questions in return. He looked at her in surprise and asked her with a smile how she managed to cross the mountain range. Since he knew that there was incredibly thick snow there in winter, the queen smiled and said that she used the barbarian method, and they are not as primitive as they might seem at first glance. She said that, however, their way of life was so different that they could not understand them. Cyrano looked closely at the lord and said that he was now truly interested in meeting the young man in person. Kyle looked at the queen in surprise and asked what barbaric method they were talking about. The queen said that they were heating the path with fire and digging holes to create a shelter with a suitable temperature. Cyrano said that he would stop all the nobles who wanted to put a reward on the author's head. He said that he would under no circumstances allow his identity to be revealed to the nobles. Aroa knew that she would have to meet Evan next. Tan, the only thing she liked about him was his service in the National Guard before his family went completely bankrupt, but she was depressed by the fact that he had a fiancé. The queen said she saw virtually no advantage. She was puzzled that, despite all this, he was still chosen as one of the candidates. Tess looked at the queen puzzled and said that it was indeed strange. She asked the queen if she had asked the head butler. The queen said she had asked, but he had only said that she should meet him at least once. She said that perhaps he had a reason for it. Tess looked at the queen and asked why she asked the second candidate to choose the meeting place himself. She said that he was rather embarrassed about it. The queen smiled and said that it would be more interesting that way. She said that based on the place he chose, she would get a clue about his identity. But still, the queen was a little puzzled, since the place he chose was the 12th pub. She smiled and said it was quite a nice place. The fact that on his first meeting with the queen he invites her to a pub for a drink already gives hope. Tess said that the maid told her that it was not a pub, but more of a restaurant, and people go there not to drink, but to enjoy the food, and plus, there is a wonderful atmosphere. The queen was puzzled and wondered if anyone went to a pub just to eat. She was already eager to find out what kind of person he was. The young man looked at the queen intently and asked if he could find out under whose name she had reserved the table. The queen looked at him in surprise and said that she would like to go to the table that Ave had reserved. Tan. The young man's expression changed in the blink of an eye, and he looked at the queen with a smile. He smiled and said that he would certainly take her to the VIP room. The queen looked at the young man in surprise, but did not answer. A moment later, she entered the room and saw the young man sitting at the table, trembling as he waited for the queen. The young man looked intently at the queen, and with a smile, wished her a pleasant time. The queen, in turn, looked intently at the young man, as he looked better than she expected. She wondered if he didn't have a cute face. Ive, in turn, became very nervous when he saw the queen and addressed her by her title. The queen looked at him with fury and said that she would mince him if he called her that again. The queen said with a smile that she did not expect him to recognize her immediately, since he was a simple officer. However, he immediately paid attention to her. The young man looked at the queen with embarrassment and said that it went without saying. She looked at him intently and asked if he had joined the army after she left. She said that she felt like he had never seen her. Eve timidly said that it was because his beloved was crazy about the queen. The queen looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. Ave said in a puzzled tone that they could skip this part. The queen looked at him with a smile and said that he was too worried and asked him to sit down. He meekly agreed. The queen looked closely at the table where there were various dishes. She said that, of course, she loved to eat well, but she asked the young man if he had ordered too much. He looked at her intently and said with a smile that he had heard that good food helps people open their hearts. She looked at him in surprise and asked if it was true. He said he had been told that she loved seafood and spicy food, so he ordered the best spicy seafood in the entire capital. The queen was surprised and pleased by this. She realized that he was very well aware of her tastes. Ave looked closely at the queen and said with a smile that the ingredients and the food itself were of the highest freshness. He said with a smile that this restaurant serves the most delicious southern chili sauce. The queen smiled, looking at the young man, and said that she understood everything, and also said that in that case they could try everything. The queen slowly tried various dishes. She wondered if food could really be so delicious. She was delighted, and her taste buds were simply shining with happiness. A moment later, frowning, she said she needed some wine. With the speed of lightning, the young man approached the queen and with a smile poured her some fine wine. He said that he had thought of everything. The queen looked at the young man in surprise, as he had amazed her. Aroa looked at him and said with a smile that she was pleasantly surprised. Aves, with an embarrassed smile, said that, no matter who he told, no one believed him. He said that it was a great honor for him to be present on this date with her. The young man smiled and said that he was also quite interested to know about the person who had recommended him. The queen smilingly said that it was Sir Ganesh. Avi looked at the queen in surprise and asked in a trembling voice if he was not Her Majesty's closest aide. He could not imagine that such a person would recommend him. The queen looked at the young man closely and said that she was also quite interested. She looked at him and asked what he thought were his strengths. The young man timidly said that he didn't even know, and he doubted that appearance was the main criterion. The queen looked at him in surprise and asked if he really thought he looked better than all the men in the empire. Ave timidly said that he didn't mean it that way. She looked at him in surprise and said that he had just said it himself. A moment later, he said with a smile that he was the nice guy type. The queen looked closely at the young man and asked how his beloved felt about this, since he had become a candidate for the role of the queen's husband. She said that even if the marriage with her was arranged by their parents, she must give her consent. The queen said that it would not be very good if he betrayed his own wife. The young man looked at the queen with embarrassment and asked if he could ask her for a favor. He said it was a very small favor. The queen looked at him intently and asked what he was talking about. He handed her a piece of paper and asked her to write her name on it. The queen looked at the young man in bewilderment and asked what he was talking about. He timidly said that he would like to receive her signature as a souvenir. He smiled an embarrassed smile and said that his beloved made him ask the queen for an autograph. He asked if she could help him with this. The queen looked at the young man in surprise and asked if this was really his fiancé's request. The young man became sad for a moment and said that it was, and if he didn't bring her an autograph, he would have problems. Aroa smiled and said that she picked him up and also asked him to repeat his fiancé's name again. He smiled and said that her name was Vanessa Brunhill. The queen thought for a moment and remembered the young lady. The queen knew that the young lady was one of the most famous ladies in all of high society. She wondered if she had thought correctly, or if they were just namesakes. The young lady, in turn, looked at the document with a smile. She was shocked and couldn't believe that she had received an autograph from the queen herself. Avi looked at his beloved and timidly said that he was also very surprised when the queen agreed. He also said that the queen's handwriting was a little strange. The young lady sighed heavily and told her companion that he was very noisy. Avi looked at the young lady with a puzzled look and asked if she was still angry with him. Eve looked at his beloved, puzzled, but said that he really didn't have any relationship with that maid. He said that he had only seen her a few times when he was passing through, and she said that she was going through a hard time and she just needed to talk. Vanessa looked at the young man with fury and said that this was just ridiculous. She asked if she didn't have any friends, parents, brothers, and sisters to talk to. She asked why he should talk alone with someone with whom he had no relationship, and in a bar. Eve looked intently at his beloved and asked if she was jealous. She said with fury that this was not the case at all. Vanessa looked closely at the young man and asked what her problem was. She asked us what compelled the young lady to bring a man who already had a fiancé to the bar. Eve thought for a moment and said that the lady said that she has a boyfriend whom she really likes, but who already has a lover. But the bride is such an outstanding person that in comparison to her, she is not even able to confess her feelings. Vanessa looked at her companion with fury and asked what happened next. He looked at her intently and said that the survey advised her to confess her feelings so that later she would not regret anything. Then she asked him what he would do if someone confessed their feelings to him. He looked closely at his companion and with a radiant smile said that he told the girl that this man would immediately die at the hands of his fiancée if he confessed his feelings to him. Eve looked closely at the young lady and asked if everything was true, he said. Vanessa looked at him with fury and said that he was just a fool. The young man was shocked, as he did not expect to hear such a thing. A moment later, he said timidly that, if you think about it, they were colleagues, and he didn't see what was wrong with having a few drinks together. He asked her if she really had to be that angry with him. Ave looked intently at his beloved and said that the girl even has a man she likes. Vanessa looked at him with fury. Ave P realized that he needed to be silent for a while. He looked intently at his companion and said that if she said anything, he would never approach her again. A moment later, looking at his companion, he asked if he could just see the queen like that. He said it was a viewing, although it reminded him more of an interview. Looking at his bride, he asked what would happen if he became her husband. Vanessa laughed right in her companion's face. She asked if he had gone completely crazy. She said that sometimes he talks complete nonsense. She asked her companion why. Her Majesty should make him her husband. Vanessa smiled and said that since he managed to get the autograph of the queen herself, she was converting him. The young man breathed a sigh of relief. He looked at her closely and said with a smile that, in that case, they could go somewhere together. Vanessa smiled and said that, unfortunately, she had a very important meeting today. Therefore, she thought that she would not be there until dawn, since tomorrow morning there would be a new deal regarding the southern lands, and this is a new contract. He looked intently at his companion, as he was very glad. He knew that she was always busy. Vanessa was the heiress of the Brunhill family, which had enormous influence in the country. He knew that she practically never had a day off, so they rarely got a chance to spend time together. He looked closely at the young lady and asked if she understood why the meeting with the queen had been arranged. He wanted her to know that they were to be married soon. He wanted to know if she really loved him. He wanted to know if his beloved really wanted to marry him. Blake's central headquarters, throwing the doors open in fury and shouting at the young man to come out immediately. The third candidate is Viperion. Blake looked at the queen with bewilderment. The queen looked intently at the young man. She knew that he had no flaws in his appearance, neither in talent nor in character, but there were two good reasons why he could not become the husband of Her Majesty. The queen looked closely at the young man and asked with a grin whether he was coming or not. The young man looked at the queen with puzzlement and asked why he needed to go somewhere. The queen said that if she won, she would strip him of his noble title, and if he won, he could annul the previous conditions. Viperion looked at the queen with a puzzled look and said that the conditions were a little unfavorable for him. The first reason why they couldn't be together was because they were friends who grew up constantly competing with each other in fighting skills. The queen glared at him and said with a smirk that the winner would get Isabel. He glared at her with fury and asked what kind of nonsense she was saying. She looked at him with a smirk and asked if he was scared, calling him an old loser. The second reason was the girl he loved more than his life. Viperion was head over heels in love with Isabel Salu. He looked at the queen with fury and said that he was already coming. Some time later, they were already standing on the training ground, ready to begin the fight. The knights looked at them intently. One of the knights said that this was a very funny sight, since it was not every day that they could see something like this. Another knight told him to watch his language, since if anyone heard, he would immediately go to court. The young man looked at the queen intently and asked if she knew why he continued to accept her challenges. The queen looked at him with a smirk and asked if he really hoped to win even once. He sighed heavily and said that it was not so. The queen looked at him in surprise and asked why he was doing this then. Viperion said angrily that he wanted to remind Her Majesty of how great her power was. A moment later, he struck the queen with fury. They fought fiercely for some time. He looked intently at the queen and asked if she herself was against the marriage. The queen looked at the young man with a grin and said that it was a secret. He looked at her intently and said that they could simply say that Her Majesty had defeated him, because of which he, being insulted, refused the offer. The queen looked at the young man closely and said that it would be better to say that he had tried a sneak attack on her, after which she became angry and drove him away. The queen said angrily that she herself did not know, and told him to think for himself. She looked at him intently and said that Isabel wouldn't be angry anyway. Viperion Z froze at what he heard. A moment later, he said with a grin that the young lady would find it funny. The queen looked closely at the young man, as she was surprised that the young lady had already rejected the offer of the second most influential military leader in all of Babylon more than once. She looked at him intently and said that she would say that he had shamefully lost to her. She said that in any case, their class difference was too great. Aroa looked at him intently and said that Dee thinks it's still worth making sure. He looked at her in surprise and asked what she was talking about. The queen looked intently at the young man and asked in all seriousness if he would like to become her husband. Viperion looked at the queen with anger and bewilderment and said that he did not want to do this. He said that he would rather send her to war again. Rising from the ground, he asked the queen what she was going to do next. He said that of the husband candidates, only one, Cyrano, remained. The queen sighed heavily and said that everything was exactly so. She was puzzled and did not know what to do next. The queen was slowly getting ready for the fourth date. The maid looked at the queen intently and said that it would be great if she could wear a dress at least once. The queen looked at the maid with puzzlement and said that she was not going to a ball or a banquet. She did not understand why she should wear a dress. The maid looked at the queen in surprise and asked if she really remembered her name. The queen was perplexed and said that of course she knew her name, since she saw her every day. A moment later, looking at all the maids, she called them by name. The young maids were shocked, as they did not expect to hear such a thing. A moment later, the queen looked closely at the maid and asked why she suddenly started talking about this outfit. The maid timidly said that it was a pity, since so many beautiful dresses were wasted. She said that in her palace there were 8 wardrobes filled with dresses. Tess looked at the queen closely and said that clothes had to be looked after regularly to keep the fabric from getting damaged, and that the maids always pictured her in those clothes. The queen looked at them in surprise and asked if they really imagined her in dresses. The maids looked closely at the queen and said with smiles that all the outfits would certainly suit the beautiful queen. The queen thought that everything was correct, since the only members of the royal family in Babylon were she and her Aunt Norris, and therefore they simply had no alternative. The queen looked at them closely and agreed. She said that they could bring something like a skirt. Everyone present was surprised by the sudden change of the queen. The queen told the maid to bring not a luxurious dress, but a simple skirt. Tess looked closely at the queen and said that they would find a suitable outfit for her with lightning speed, and she only needed to wait a few minutes. The queen looked closely at her outfit. She was pleased, and she liked the combination. The maids looked at the queen intently. They said that she looked simply magnificent in this outfit, since they previously thought that the queen hated such outfits. The queen looked at her maids and asked them why she should hate such clothes. She said that she had no particular reason to dislike clothes that made her more beautiful. The queen smiled and said that the problem was only in constant training, and there would be problems, but to change clothes every time? Tess came closer to the queen and told her to look in the mirror, as she looked absolutely beautiful. Aroa, in turn, stared intently into the mirror. The queen looked at the Lord and asked in all seriousness what she looked like. The Lord smiled and said that the queen looked delightful. The queen looked closely at the Lord and asked if he had said this to cheer her up. She smiled and said that it seemed that during her absence, he had learned to flatter. The Lord said that Her Majesty's appearance could be compared to the divine. He did not even have the right to talk about her beauty. The queen was very angry. She looked at the Lord and told him to stop, as it was time for her to go. The Lord wished her a good journey with a smile. The queen looked intently at the nature around her, because she understood that she would see Cyrano again in their place. She remembered her friend asking if she could ask her a question. Isabel was interested in why her marriage with the young man did not work out, since he was closer to her than anyone else. Isabel wanted to know if it was betrayal or a lust for power that was the reason. The queen, in turn, knew that it was not so, since he simply felt guilty for what he did. She knew that in the past he understood her better than anyone and would never have turned away from her. Then he spoke in front of the aristocrats that they could declare war. He said that even if they continued to look down on the queen, the barbarians of the Eastern Ridge would consider them a much easier target than Caracas. The aristocrats were shocked. They asked the young man if he really wanted to start a war just because of their disrespect. Cyrano said that at this rate, one of the aristocracy would decide to start a civil war, and the crown and nobles would start tearing each other's throats out like enemies. He said that in such a scenario, they would meet an even more dangerous enemy. He said that if civil war broke out and the queen's blade was pointed at them, and the south was not long in coming, he said that they would immediately invade the northern lands. Cyrano shouted that it was for this very reason that they must strike first. He said that with his disrespect, their arrogant emperor had challenged them. He said that they had no right to retreat. The aristocrats were puzzled and said that Caracas was far from a weak opponent. They wondered if they could stand up to them. Cyrano looked intently at those present and said that it seemed they had forgotten that they had the goddess of war on their side. The queen looked closely at the young man and said with a grin that his beloved was going to war. She asked if he would like to say a few words of forgiveness. She looked closely at him and asked what kind of groom he was, Cyrano. Looking at the queen, he said that the troops provided by the nobles could not boast of their preparation. He said that they were all exhausted by the lack of resources and they should prepare a plan in advance. He said that in 6 months he would begin to reconscript troops. Cyrano S. said that until then the situation would be extremely difficult. He asked her not to overdo it too much. The queen looked at him intently and asked how long it would all take. He sighed heavily and said roughly, somewhere between 3 and 5 years. He said that she had to crush the barbarians, leaving scars so deep in their lands that they would not recover from them for another 3 decades. He looked at her intently and said that after she managed to recapture all the territory from the eastern mountains, she needed to return home immediately. The queen looked at him intently and said that she understood everything, and also asked him to be careful. He smiled, looking at the queen, and said that she must certainly win and return home alive. From that moment on, Cyrano and Aran became military partners for each other. The young man, unfortunately, survived countless assassination attempts, and when Queen Wu learned that his parents had died trying to protect their son, she decided to immediately release him. The queen was shocked and a little puzzled, as she realized that they would now have to sit opposite each other. She remembered what happened that day. He told her that everything would be fine and he would definitely help her. The queen thought for a moment, as she realized that she should at least thank him. She looked into the distance in surprise, as she realized that he was late, but she did not understand why. A moment later, she heard some noise. The man ran up to the queen and said that the young man would not come to the meeting. She looked at the man in surprise and asked what he was talking about. Aroa looked at the man in surprise and asked what it meant. She looked at him puzzled and asked if something had happened to the young man. The man was shaking with fear. He said that it was not about that. The gentleman simply said that the main purpose of meeting with candidates is to get to know each other. He said that the gentleman, unfortunately, does not consider himself a suitable candidate and therefore does not want to waste Her Majesty's time. He also said that at such an important time, it is necessary to carefully monitor the actions of the Council of Nobles. He conveyed that she should refrain from making hasty decisions that could put her in danger. The queen looked at the man with fury and asked if she had heard correctly. The man looked at the queen because he saw that she was angry. She was furious and did not understand how he dared to do this to her. She asked if she had not told him to sit quietly and not to stick his neck out. The man was shocked by the queen's reaction and asked her for forgiveness in a trembling voice. The queen was furious, and since he not only kept her waiting, but did not show up at the meeting, she did not understand what was on his mind. She looked at her subjects with fury and said that they were returning. The queen was puzzled because she just wanted to sit next to him by the lake. She knew that before they were too busy to spend time with each other, so she could not enjoy even such little things. She truly believed that much must have changed over the years, and she hoped that they could become close friends. The queen laughed to herself, for she had completely forgotten that he was one of those people who could make even a queen wait. Cyrano P. looked at the young man and asked how much longer they had to wait. The Cheshire Cat sighed heavily and said that he should have arrived by now. He looked at his companion and said that if he was tired of waiting, he could go, since he could handle everything himself. Cyrano looked at the young man intently. Cheshire was puzzled by his assertive gaze. since he listened to Cyrano's orders. To become the leader of the dark alley, Cheshire puzzledly said that he could decide for himself, of course. A moment later, the young man sighed heavily and said, "It seems the young man has already arrived." Some time later, they saw Kyle K., who was talking politely to everyone. Cheshire said with a grin that Kyle just bought himself a snack. Cyrano looked at the young man in surprise and asked if he was really using shopkeepers as intermediaries. Cheshire S. said that there was an attack, but there was, and if you appease them with a coin, they would do anything. Cheshire S. said that if you bribe the permanent owner of the shop, he will certainly keep any secret. He said with a smile that they know how to take care of themselves, and if they are backed up against the wall, their long tongues always come to the rescue. Cyrano looked at the young man in surprise and said that this was very clever. The young man said that now they needed to find a way to get closer to him. Some men were watching. Kayla N. Cyrano looked closely at his companion and called him. Cheshire said with a grin that he knew and saw and would certainly do everything. Cheshire looked sideways at his companion and told him to watch and learn. Sometime later, the men came closer to Kyle and called him by his nickname. He looked at the bandits in surprise, but a moment later he knocked over the bag of money. Everyone was shocked and stared at the money that was falling from the sky. Cheshire was shocked and very confused as his money was flying all over the street. With lightning speed, he began to collect all the money and shouted to all the passers-by that they should not dare take his money. The man glanced sideways at the young man who was constantly shouting and chasing away all the passers-by so that they would not take his money. A moment later, he looked closely at the young man who was running away in a hurry. Kyle was breathing heavily as he stood near the wall. He was glad that he had managed to escape from his pursuers. A moment later, someone grabbed him by the shoulder and asked if he really thought it was a good idea to run into a place like that during a chase. Kyle looked at the man in surprise, but a moment later he clearly saw who was standing in front of him. He was surprised because he did not expect to see Cyrano. Lessors! 2 hours earlier, the young man was leisurely getting ready to meet the queen. He remembered how she asked him if he really thought that love could make amends. He looked at her intently and said that he believed that nothing was impossible for human emotions. The queen looked at him intently and said sadly that it was all true. She asked if she had said that she wanted to marry him, would he have agreed to the proposal? The young man sighed heavily and said that it was his duty, but unfortunately, now was not the best time. He said that it would be better to return to this conversation a little later. The queen sighed heavily and timidly said that she was very sorry. She said that the only thing she could offer him now was marriage. The queen said that even this is more of a commitment for both of them. She was puzzled because she knew that everything would have been much simpler if her father had lived. He looked at her intently and said that it was time for them to go. He remembered how that day Her Majesty had said that her palms felt stuffy, and then she had taken his hand without gloves. He knew that it was the first time she had touched his palm with her fingers in this way. He was angry because he knew that from that day on, they never held hands again or discussed marriage. He was furious with himself and wondered why he had not been sincere. When he wanted to tell her that it was not her fault that what happened, he wanted to say that if she was having a hard time, she should not be afraid, but should just share her thoughts and experiences with him. He wanted to say that he was ready to do anything for her. He thought that these were probably the words she had been missing. He didn't know if she wanted the marriage and wondered what would have happened if they had simply settled for being military partners. He knew he would have been happy to simply stand there longer as a friend. He had no desire to part. The servant looked at his master and said that a man named Cheshire had already arrived. Cyrano was surprised because he did not expect to see him. Kyle looked at his companion closely and said that he had saved him, but he did not understand why he had done something like that. He asked if it was because he was a direct candidate for Her Majesty's husband. Cyrano sighed heavily and said that everything was correct. Kyle looked at his companion in surprise and asked how he knew this. He asked Cyrano if he knew who those pursuers were. Cyrano sighed heavily and said that soon there would be someone else behind them. Cyrano looked at his companion intently and asked if he wanted to know what he knew about him. Kyle looked at him in surprise and said that he would like to know. Cyrano looked intently at his companion and said that he was the same unknown author who writes ridiculous articles about the aristocracy. He said that the nobles whom he had caused trouble had put a large reward on his head. Cyrano sighed heavily and said that money-hungry street thugs had found out that he was the author and they had tried to kill him. Kyle asked his companion in a trembling voice if the queen knew about this. He asked if it was really she who had hired them. Cyrano sighed heavily and said that this was not so, and the queen did not know anything. Kyle looked at his companion in surprise, as he did not understand why he helped him. Cyrano looked at him intently and said that it was all because he was a candidate for the queen's husband. Kyle looked at his companion with a puzzled expression and asked who the guy who was collecting the money was. He didn't remember his face. Unfortunately, he only remembered how he was throwing the money around. Cyrano hesitated, not knowing how to answer this question. Kyle said that apparently E was someone he didn't need to know about. Cyrano sighed heavily and said that perhaps it would be better that way. Kyle looked at his companion with a puzzled expression and said that he was very grateful to him for his help. Cyrano, looking at the young man, said that soon I would be done with the bandits. Cyrano looked closely at his companion and said that at the moment no one else knew that he was the unknown author, so he did not need to worry about this situation anymore. He said that today he had saved not Kyle, but the critic and writer himself. The young man was puzzled and wondered if his companion really wanted to say that he had saved the writer and critic, but he still thanked him for saving him. Kyle hesitated and said that, unfortunately, he had nothing to repay him with, but he had no intention of even stopping his business. Cyrano looked at the young man in surprise and asked if he would really write, even if they tried to kill him again. Kyle said that if he had been afraid of this, he would never have started writing such articles. Cyrano. In turn, he didn't even expect to hear anything else. He looked intently at the young man and said that he didn't need anything from him. Cyrano asked him to continue living as he had lived before. Cyrano, looking at the young man, said that he can denigrate the bad, write insults, revelations, and ridicule. Kyle looked at his companion in surprise and asked what he was talking about, since he did not expect to hear such a thing. Cyrano told his companion that he could write whatever he wanted. The young man looked at him in surprise and asked if this was true. Cyrano smiled and said that it was. Kyle looked closely at his companion and asked if he really had an appointment with Her Majesty today. Cyrano, in turn, did not answer, but simply looked away. The queen, in turn, was very angry, but she had no plans to punish the young man for such an act. The queen looked closely at the butler and asked where the duke was now. The man bowed and politely said that the duke was now on the first floor of the palace. She looked intently at the man and told him to bring him here immediately and tell him that the queen's husband candidate, the vile Cyrano N, had not shown up for the meeting. The man looked at the queen with confusion and surprise. He asked what she was talking about, since he simply could not believe what had happened. Aroa looked at the man and said that this situation had upset her greatly. The queen looked at the man with fury and told him to bring it immediately. The queen looked at the lord in surprise and asked if the old duke had really put Cyrano under house arrest. Lore sighed heavily and said that it was true. He had been ordered not to leave his estate until her anger had subsided. The queen thought for a moment, for she did not know what to do. She said that he should take into account that her anger was not so easily appeased. But, on the one hand, she was glad that he would not be able to go out for some time. The lord looked intently at the queen and said that he would certainly convey that she was very angry about this situation. The queen looked at the lord intently and said that she was still lucky that he was still alive. The lord smiled and said that he was alive and well and would not die until Her Majesty was happy. The queen looked at him intently and with a smile told him not to even dare to die before her. The lord looked at her in surprise and with a smile said that people do not live that long. A moment later, the queen looked intently at the lord and called him. She said she wanted to talk about the guy who came into her chambers naked. She asked the Lord if he had found out who sent him. The Lord looked at her in surprise and asked if she really meant Snow. She remembered that that was the guy's name. The Lord sighed heavily and said that the guy said that he didn't know the identity of the one behind him. The queen was surprised by such a statement. The Lord said that it seemed like he was just a stupid and innocent fry, and the client did not even tell him the name of the customer. The queen looked at him in surprise and asked if the guy said anything else. The Lord looked at the queen intently and said that the young man said that he was promised to be paid 1,000 gold. The queen was surprised as she did not expect to hear such a thing. She thought that they took his family hostage and threatened him, but now she realized that it seemed that he just needed money. She looked at the Lord intently, and with a smile, told him to bring the guy straight to her. She said that perhaps he had lied about it, and it would be better to shake everything he knew out of him. The queen looked closely at the young man and told him to kneel down. Looking at him, she introduced herself. The young man was taken aback. He trembled before the queen, begged her for forgiveness. She looked at him intently and asked if he had ever wondered why only her name had the particle astrobot in it. The young man looked at her in surprise, but did not answer. She looked at him intently and said that Astrophote was the name of the god of war, the deity that came to their lands even before the founding of Babylon. According to legend, the north was their home for some time. After some time they left these lands and left their names to mere mortals. Astrothoth, being one of them, gave his power to one man. That man was the founder of Babylon. She looked closely at the young man and said that this sounded like complete nonsense. The queen looked at the young man intently and told him to now answer a few questions. She said with fury that she would not tolerate lies in her presence. The young man shouted that he would definitely answer everything. The queen looked intently at the Lord and called him to her. She looked at the young man intently and said that if he did not answer or told a lie, he should not be surprised if she cut his joke in half. She looked at him intently and asked where he was from. The young man hesitated, not knowing what to answer. He was trembling with fear. The queen said with fury that she would regard silence as a lie. He was very frightened and, with the speed of lightning, said that he was from the capital and was born in Babylon. She asked how he managed to get in and remain unnoticed by the guards. The young man said that it was raining and he just bought a maid's costume and dressed in it. Passing through the inner gate, he helped one customer with the dishes. When he was inside, the knights did not even pay attention to him. The Lord was shocked by what he heard. The queen looked at him closely and asked if he had a family. She also asked if he had tried to escape. The young man answered the questions in the negative. She asked if anyone had contacted him while he was imprisoned in her castles. Snow looked closely at the queen and said that this had not happened. Aroa smiled and said that it looked like he got his beautiful yellow hair from his mother. He looked at her in surprise, not understanding what she was talking about. A moment later, he said that he had never seen his mother because he was an orphan. She looked at him in surprise and said that it looked like he was an illegitimate child. The queen looked closely at the young man and said that the only question was whose son he was. A moment later, the young man shouted, looking at the queen, and said that he was just a wandering orphan. He said that an unknown client had promised him 1,000 gold pieces if he succeeded in seducing the queen. The queen, in turn, was furious at what she heard with the speed of lightning, and she walked up to him and struck him with fury. She looked at him with fury and said angrily that he had been told not to lie to her. Barely controlling herself, she asked again who was behind him. The young man, trembling with fear, said that he really didn't know anything. The queen looked at him with fury and said that her patience was not infinite. A moment later, she sat him down on a chair. Snow was taken aback, without uttering a word. Aroa glared at him and said that just 4 years ago she had constantly heard the barbarians torturing their captives at the border. The young man was trembling with fear. He looked at the queen with tears in his eyes. She looked at him with a grin and said that even without fingers and toes, his life would not be in danger. The queen said with a grin, since she had no tools at hand at the moment, she thought it would be worthwhile to break his bones first. The young man trembled with fear and begged the queen not to do such a thing. She looked at him intently and asked with fury who sent him. The young man was trembling with fear and crying. He shouted that he knew nothing and also begged her for leniency. He shouted that he had only been promised the revelation of the name of his biological father. Looking at the queen, he said that the man who hired him promised to tell him the name of his father. The queen looked intently at the young man. The queen looked at the lord and said that both his father and the man who hired him were undoubtedly nobles. Lord bowed humbly and said that he understood everything. The queen said that he must be a fairly high-ranking aristocrat. She thought for a moment, not knowing who exactly it could be. The lord looked at the queen closely and said that he believed they could only continue their investigation. He said that it would be difficult to find the culprit since the whole situation was not yet clear. The queen said that, like the sunrise, everything should happen unnoticed. Lore sighed heavily and said that hundreds of eyes were always on Her Majesty, and it would be better to entrust this to some reliable person, the most reliable of all, someone who could move without being noticed. Aroa asked, puzzled, if she was really imagining turning to Cyrano. Lesors. The lord looked at the queen intently and said that he was a man capable of destroying even the most complex structure, and therefore she had nothing to worry about. The knight looked at the queen in surprise. He did not expect to see her. The queen looked at the knight intently, and with a smile told him to go and report her visit immediately. A moment later, the knight rushed forward with lightning speed and reported the queen's arrival. The duke ran outside in a hurry and asked what was going on. He was puzzled. He asked if the war had really started, or if an intruder had been discovered. The queen looked at the duke intently and said with a grin that he had guessed wrong. She smiled and said that it had been a long time since they had talked at dinner, so she decided to visit him. The duke looked hard at the queen and said that in that case, he would go and tidy himself up. Aroa looked closely at the duke and asked where his grandson was. The duke looked at the queen with confusion and asked if she really wanted to see him. She smiled and said that she needed to tell him something. The duke said that he would bring him to her immediately. The queen smiled and said that it would be enough for her for the duke to simply call him. The queen looked closely at the butler and asked with a smile if she understood correctly that the previous king often visited this place without warning. The butler smiled and said that it was true, and he could come no matter the day or night. There were even cases when he climbed over the fence to get to them. The queen said that although it was vague, she remembered that they had often been here as children. The man smiled and said that it was so, and she loved to ride on her father's shoulders. The butler said that in addition to the previous king, the duke also often rode her on his shoulders. The queen looked intently at the butler and asked if she really looked like her father. The butler smiled, looking at the queen, and said that there could not even be any doubt, since she was a true copy of her father. The queen sighed heavily and said that her father was ugly. The man timidly said that he did not mean his appearance. A moment later, the queen saw Cyrano in front of her. He, in turn, was very surprised, as he did not expect to see her. She looked at him intently and said with a smile that he was just a brat. The young man turned his gaze away from the queen and fell silent. She looked at him and told him to follow her. Some time later, they came to her father's tombstone. She noticed that there were new flowers on his grave again. She knew that it was probably Cyrano who brought them to the grave. She looked at him and asked what the reason was. She didn't understand why he visited the grave of the previous king so often. She asked why he didn't show up for the meeting without any excuse. Aroa asked if he couldn't at least warn her. He looked at her closely and asked if she was feeling better yet. He asked if she had discussed her symptoms with a doctor. The queen looked at him intently and called out, "He asked her if she was okay." The queen was furious. She looked at the young man intently and told him to answer her question immediately. She asked why he did not immediately refuse the role of a candidate for husband. Cyrano sighed heavily, but unfortunately did not answer. She looked at him intently and asked if it was because all the candidates were hand-picked by him. She said that when she heard the names Kyle and Ava, it didn't seem strange to her. But when the names of Viperion and Vanessa came to light, her suspicions began to creep in, and then she assumed that he was involved. She said that all people were not candidates for husbands, but the brightest talents who could help in governing the kingdom. The queen looked at the young man intently and told him to answer her immediately. She asked angrily if it was he who had chosen them, or the head butler. He sighed heavily and said that it wasn't that important. The queen smiled as she looked at the young man and said that she already knew that Kyle was an excellent assistant. She said that from birth his passion had been science, and confinement within the walls of the palace would make the rest of his life miserable. The queen thought for a moment and said that regarding Ivan, Vanessa is a big fan of the queen. That's why her lover became a candidate. But if they weren't a couple, he wouldn't have chosen Ivan. She assumed that the reason for Viperian's choice was obvious to everyone. The queen sighed heavily and said that she understood that these people, like no one else, could keep the annoying aristocracy in check. She looked at him in surprise and asked why he suddenly assumed that they would be loyal to her. She looked closely at her companion and asked what would happen if she suddenly failed and could not win the trust of one of them. She said that this could lead to a chain reaction. She asked him what she should do in such a case. He looked closely at the queen and said that he was sure that she would not fail. The queen was furious. She looked at him intently and asked how he could know. Cyrano said that they would never turn their backs on her. He said that all she had to do was extend her hand to them. He looked at the queen and said that he did not consider her a daughter of the gods, and even if all Babylon shouted about it at the top of its lungs, he said that his opinion would not change. Cyrano looked closely at the queen and said that she was a human being like everyone else, and was not in pain. He said that she also needed support. The queen was puzzled, looked at him and said that if it was all because of that incident, then he should not worry about such things. The young man looked closely at the queen and said that, unfortunately, she could not bear this burden alone. He said she needed a circle of close people, those who would become her eyes and voice. The queen said she already had a senior butler, as well as a duke, who was his grandfather. The queen looked at him intently and asked if he wanted her to meet each of them again and make them her trusted subordinates. He smiled at the queen and said that all she had to do was extend her hand to them, and then they would stand by her side. She looked at him in surprise and asked why he was so sure of this. He smiled, looking at her, and said that it was all because it was her. The queen looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. Cyrano looked closely at the queen and said that she was the ruler of their entire kingdom. He said that she was none other than the queen, and that this reason would be more than enough. He knew that only she didn't know who she really was. Every time he looked at her, he saw a piece of this sincerity. He knew that she must be tired of this blinding light. But in turn, he knew that he would never leave her, and would never refuse to be by her side. He just wanted her to extend her hand, and he would take care of the rest himself. He knew that the path she must take was the path of a queen. She sighed heavily and told him to put everything on the line, and she would definitely try to think of something. He looked at her in surprise. The queen smiled and said that he was still not allowed to leave the house. She said that he did not need to worry so much, as she would not ask him for help. He sighed heavily, but did not answer, as he hoped to hear something else. She looked at him intently and asked if he knew that an intruder had broken into her bedroom. The young man was stunned by this news. He looked closely at the queen and asked what she had just said. The queen said that recently a man had come into her bedroom and thrown off his cloak. He was wearing only his underwear. She said that he was also wearing a piece of lace fabric that looked like a net. She asked if he had accidentally given her the task of seducing her. Cyrano looked at the queen with fury and asked who this man was. The queen said that she locked him in the basement and was trying to find out who was behind him. He said angrily that he would immediately conduct an investigation. The queen looked at her friend in surprise, as she did not expect such a reaction, but she still agreed with him. The maid looked at the queen intently and said that Kyle said that it was a private visit. Aroa was surprised and did not understand why Kyle. The maids looked intently at the queen. They wanted to see him as soon as possible. The queen looked at them and said with a smile that she allowed it. They looked at her in surprise and asked if she was serious. She asked them if they really wanted to attend a private visit. The young man looked intently at the queen and greeted her with a beaming smile on his face. The queen smiled and told him to come in quickly. She asked if he had eaten and said that they could share a meal together. He smiled and said that he was just about to have lunch. The queen said that her cook was the best in Babylon. She asked if he was really going to refuse the dishes he had prepared. He smiled and said that he would eat without reservation. The queen looked at him intently and asked if international political analysis was really that interesting. Kyle thought for a moment and said that it was indeed interesting, and also asked why the queen was asking such questions. She smiled and said that she had one question. The young man said that she could safely ask him questions and he would be happy to answer them. She smiled and asked what he thought was the best way to end them all at once. He looked at her in surprise and asked what she was talking about. The queen said that there was too much fuss now about marrying her to their children and producing heirs, and she asked what she should do to prevent the budding nobility from questioning the inalienable rights of the ruler. He looked at her intently and asked if this was a work-from-home assignment. The queen smiled at the young man and asked if he could handle it. He said he needed a little time to think it over properly. She looked at him intently and asked what this visit meant. She asked why he asked for a private meeting. He looked at her intently and said that he came to her to ask for a date. The Queen of Pisana looked at him and said that he should be careful, as the dish could be spicy. A moment later, he felt the full spiciness of this dish. The queen smiled and said that she really liked spicy food. She looked at him intently and said that they say that if he can't eat spicy food, then this dish won't make him stronger. The young man hesitated and said that he couldn't eat it, even though it was ordinary. The queen looked at him intently and said that these letters have been piling up lately. She tore the letter up in a hurry, furious that the stubborn scoundrels continued to be serious. The young man was surprised, wondering if this was really a marriage proposal. He saw that the queen was laughing and cursing them. He looked at her intently and asked her if she thought the nobility should be recruited into their forces as soon as possible. The queen said that she thought so. He looked at her intently and said that she should do so. She looked at him in surprise. He smiled as he looked at the queen and said that she saw the conflict and could bring it out into the public eye. He said that those who were impressed by her devotion said that she was holding a meeting with selected candidates who were worthy, standing taller than anyone else. She sighed heavily and said that she knew there were rumors about it. He looked at the queen closely and said that there was a difference between hearing a rumor and seeing it with her own eyes. He said that if she enjoyed meeting the candidates, it would at least be a distraction. Aroa looked at him and said that it could be dangerous as they were evil and cruel. She said that she felt fine, but they had made countless attempts to kill her over the years, but they had never succeeded. He looked at her intently and said with a smile that he was also perfectly fine. The queen looked at him in surprise and asked where he got such confidence from. He smiled and said that they did not want to kill him because they understood that they would get much more if they captured him alive. Kyle smiled a bright smile and asked if this wasn't what lovers usually did. The queen looked at the young man with surprise and intently. A moment later, they were leisurely strolling through the garden, the young people having a good time. Everyone looked intently and in surprise at the queen and her companion. They were shocked as they realized that the queen had a lover. Vanessa is the richest girl in Babylon, the baron's beloved daughter and his heir, and also Evan's fiancé. She was the very woman who proposed her fiancé as a candidate for the queen's concubine. The young man looked at the queen intently and asked if there was something that she was so worried about. He asked if she could tell him about it. The queen smiled and said that she would certainly tell him everything and invited him to sit down. The southern women looked at the queen intently and with beaming smiles said that they had prepared snacks and also said that they could call them if they needed anything. The queen told them to stop looking at them and go away. He looked at the queen intently and asked if he could try some snacks. She smiled and said that of course he could. The queen was surprised as she saw that he was a very bright and interesting guy. Aroa looked at him closely and asked what he said to his fiancé. He frowned for a moment as he didn't understand what she was talking about. The queen smiled as she looked at the young man and said that she was very interested in how he explained to his fiancée that he had gone on a date with her. Eve looked at the queen, smiled, and said that he just told it like it was. He said that he told her everything, and that he enjoyed the snacks. The queen looked at him in surprise and asked if it was really not he who chose the place for the date, but his bride. He asked the queen in surprise how she knew. Eve said that it was so, and his bride told him to go there. He said that she also chose the menu and drinks. The queen was surprised and puzzled, looked at the young man, as she did not expect to hear such a thing. The young man timidly said that it was just his guess, but he said that the queen wanted to choose him as her concubine. She looked at him in surprise and asked how his fiancé reacted to this. He said that she laughed very hard. The queen was surprised, looked at him and asked what he was talking about. He smiled and said that at first he didn't make a sound, and she just laughed. Then she asked how many times they had met. When he said that they had only met for the second time, she suddenly sighed. Ava said that after the first date there would be more, but Vanessa replied that husband and wife can be separate. He knew that she was sincerely jealous. The queen looked at him in surprise and said that she could choose a husband for herself without asking his opinion. She did not understand why his bride simply laughed. He smiled puzzledly and said that his bride laughed for a very long time. The queen asked him if he knew that he could not have another wife. The young man hesitated. He now did not understand why she had smiled then. The young man looked at the queen and said that his fiancée said that she would soon like to request an official audience with her. Ave looked at the queen and said that he would like to request an audience, and therefore he had to meet with her and talk about everything in person. The queen was surprised by this statement, as she did not expect to hear something like this. She wondered if he really wanted to ask for a refusal to become her fiancé. Aroa smiled and said that she would also like to meet the young lady. She knew that when they met, she would say that he was not her type, and she would then refuse. A couple of days later, the lord informed the queen that the baron's eldest daughter, Vanessa, had arrived for an audience with her. The young lady greeted the queen according to all the rules of etiquette. The queen looked at the young lady intently and said that she was seeing her for the first time. She asked if the young lady had come to convince her to refuse the wedding with her fiancé. The young lady said that it was not so. Vanessa smiled shyly and said that she had come to say goodbye to him. The queen looked at the young lady in surprise, as she did not understand what she was talking about. Vanessa looked closely at the queen and said that her fiancé was a nice and pure man. She said that he was a little ignorant, but he knew how to listen and empathize. The queen looked at the young lady in surprise and asked if she was serious. Vanessa smiled and said that of course she was. The queen asked if she really wanted to give her fiancé to her. Vanessa said that she had no intention of making him her assistant anyway. She said that he would do a great job and that she would work hard behind the scenes. The queen was surprised as she did not expect to hear such a thing. The queen looked at the young lady in writing and said with a smile that she did not want the young man, but would like her. The young lady looked at the queen in surprise, but in the blink of an eye her expression changed, and she said with a smile that it was a great honor for her. The queen looked at the young lady with a smile and asked if she had agreed too easily. Aroa told the young lady that she should have asked about the price. Vanessa smiled as she looked at the queen. She said that she was not going to do that, as there was no need for her to do that. The lord looked at the young people with a smile. The queen asked her if she would regret it after some time. Vanessa said that all she wanted was to earn everything with her own hands, and if the queen wanted to repay her somehow, then she could pay Evan. The queen smiled and said that there must be a price for this. She asked if she could ask what exactly it was. The young lady looked at the queen intently and told her not to laugh at her. The queen looked at her in bewilderment and asked why she would suddenly laugh. The young lady smiled and said that she would like to be the first and youngest prime minister. The queen looked at Vanessa intently, as she looked like a little squirrel. Aroa looked closely at the young lady and said that this was very good. She knew that a woman had never become the head of state. She knew that even the old duke could not become prime minister until he was 60. Looking at the young lady, she wondered if she really wanted to rise to such a position. She didn't know from what depths her friend had retrieved such a treasure. The queen looked closely at the young lady and said with a smile that she would look forward to their further cooperation. The young lady looked at the queen in surprise. She was very happy about this opportunity. Tess looked hard at the young man and told him to follow her. Tess looked at Cyrano and asked if he was going to kill him. He said that he had no right to kill prisoners of Her Majesty without permission. She looked at him in surprise and asked if he was really going to torture him. He looked at her with a grin and asked if he really should do that. Tess looked at the young man with all seriousness and said that if he was still the same one she knew before, then he was just going to use him for his own benefit. She said that it was okay to kill the young man after he used him. Cyrano looked at her and said that all this was so, and that sooner or later he would have to ask for help. Tess looked at him sideways and said that if it was for Her Majesty's sake, he could ask for anything at any time. Tess said the young man's name was Snow, but she said she was afraid that she was not a frivolous idiot. A moment later, the young man saw a young man who was staring at him and shaking with fear. Cyrano! He looked at him with a grin. He wanted to deal with him as quickly as possible. Snow stood up with the speed of lightning and, looking at the young man with a puzzled expression, asked who he was. He was surprised because he had never met such a handsome person before. Snow thought he was angry. He wondered if the man was angry because of what he had done. He was very scared. Cyrano looked at the young man intently and told him to listen carefully. He also told him to think 3 times before answering. Snow looked at him in surprise and asked what they were talking about. Cyrano told him that he could refuse. Cyrano looked angrily at the young man and said that if he did this, he would die. The young man was taken aback and looked at him with fear. Cyrano looked at Snow and said that he would like to know the face of the person who ordered him to do such a thing, and the voice, as well as the figure. He wanted to know the meeting place, what he told him. Cyrano asked if he remembered it all. The young man looked at him intently and said firmly that he remembered everything. Cyrano looked at him intently and said that this was very good. He saw the impressive look in the young man. He said that he would certainly find his biological father. Snow looked at the young man in surprise and asked why he wanted to do that. Cyrano told the young man that in return from that second, he would do whatever he was ordered to do. The young man looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. Cyrano, looking at the young man, said that he must do absolutely everything, since he would be ordered when he could breathe, what to wear, what to eat, what to say, everything from laughter to tears. Cyrano looked at him sharply and said that Snow must do what he told him. Snow looked at him in surprise and asked if he was doing this because he was looking for his biological father. Cyrano looked calmly at the young man and said that he would also tell him how he could take revenge on his father. The young man looked at him in surprise, as he did not expect to hear such a thing. Cyrano said that he could arrange for his father to meet a tragic and painful death. Cyrano told the young man that he should think 3 times before answering. Snow looked at him intently and firmly said that he would do whatever Cyrano said. Cyrano looked at Cheshire and called him while he was sleeping, in broad daylight. Cheshire looked at him in surprise and asked if he had come because of the writer's identity. He said that for now the true identity was unknown to anyone. Cyrano sighed and said that he had come now for another reason. Cheshire asked in surprise for what reason he had come. Cyrano slowly handed him a note and told him to find out information about this person. Cheshire was a little puzzled and asked what exactly he needed to know. Cyrano said that he would like to know everything about his past, and if possible, he needed to find out Snow's biological father. Cheshire looked at his friend closely and asked if he was willing to pay. He said that he understood that they were business partners of some sort, but still, payment was payment. Cheshire told his friend that he could easily kill him. Cyrano looked at him intently, but did not answer. A moment later, he calmly said that he could do whatever he wanted. Cheshire looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. Cyrano, looking at his comrade, said that if he wanted to kill, he could do it now. Cyrano told him that in that case he would never fulfill his dream. The young man looked at the young man in surprise and asked how he knew about this. Cyrano said that in this country there is a powerful man who hates people like him. Cyrano looked at the young man intently and said that as soon as his identity was revealed, he would be torn to pieces and burned at the stake. The young man turned his gaze away from his comrade and silently looked at the floor. Cyrano told him that they were partners, but that what he wanted in the end would be his. Cheshire glared at his comrades and said that only this time he would pay him special attention. Isabel was in the fireworks tavern, sparkling in all her glory. Ave looked at the young lady, dumbfounded and embarrassed. He was struck by her beauty. He quietly asked her if she had arrived. Isabel smiled and said that she was already here. A moment later, the young people entered the room and saw the queen in all her glory. The queen looked closely at the young man's legs and told him not to even ask him to refuse the meeting with her. Isabel looked at them intently and wished them well. The queen looked at the young man and asked if he had heard about his bride. Ave looked intently at the queen and said that he had heard about everything. Aroa looked at him with a smile and said that she was counting on him. He timidly asked if she was sure she didn't mind being with a man like him. The queen, in turn, looked at the guy with a smile, since he was called the best playboy in the capital's armed forces. The queen looked at him intently, and with a smile told him to trust not her, but his bride. He looked at the queen with joy, and said that he would certainly do so. A moment later he said with a smile that he thought he needed a drink, and the queen smiled and agreed with him. The queen looked down from the terrace and said that it had been successful in attracting attention. She saw that the reporters had already started recording something. They were surprised and thought it strange that the queen was meeting with a man outside the tavern. He looked at her closely and asked with a smile if they should leave through the back door. The queen looked at the young man closely and said with a smile that they would not do that, as they had to walk proudly through the main entrance. Some time later, the queen and her companion were walking slowly. Ive looked at the queen with embarrassment and said that she had drunk a lot, so she needed to hold on to him. Everyone present was shocked as they realized that Her Majesty had another lover. They did not expect to see something like this. The next day, breaking news spread throughout the capital. They wrote that the queen had a new lover. They were puzzled because they did not know who the queen's real lover really was. But they said that the queen would still choose between Cyrano and Viperion, but they also heard that she fell in love with a poor professor from the academy. But others said that she chose the handsome blonde knight. They thought that perhaps she deliberately chose the humble man for the good of the kingdom. Tess looked at the queen and said that alcohol was not allowed here. She sighed heavily and said that it was all her fault. Tess was puzzled, as the queen could not even rest here. She said that it was a Buddhist temple, proclaimed by Her Majesty and which was in charge of the siege. The queen looked at her closely and said with a smile that she simply had insomnia. She said that she had had a massage today and had drunk tea that helps her sleep, so Tess should stop worrying and go back to her room. Tess looked at the queen intently and said that she would go after Her Majesty went to bed. The queen smiled and told her that if she continued to stare at her, she would become so embarrassed that she would not be able to sleep. Tess looked at the queen in surprise and asked if she would like to go for a walk. The queen sighed heavily and said with annoyance that she was too tired for a walk and felt as if she had been wrestling with a bear with her bare hands. Tess looked at the queen in surprise and asked if it really looked like a bear. She asked if the attendants reminded her of bears, and that was why she couldn't sleep. The queen looked at her with a puzzled smile and asked why she thought so. Aroa sighed heavily and said that she would now go and take a little walk, since after that she would be very tired and quickly fall asleep. Tess P bowed and said that she would accompany the queen. The queen sighed heavily and said that when a person is troubled by many doubts, he gets tired. She looked at her servant and said that she was also like the mayor of the city. A moment later, the queen remembered her former lover. She knew that even after the breakup of their engagement, he had served impeccably as Undersecretary of State for War. The old duke, in charge of Babylon, Cyrano maintained and regulated military supplies under his command. She knew that when he was doing this work, he found these talents. The queen thought for a moment, since even after discovering such brilliant talents, they could not fully develop them. She knew that he was simply acting on an absurd plan to become a candidate for the position of vice chairman. Tess looked at the queen intently and said that Sir Cyrano had come to see her. The queen looked at her in surprise and asked what she was talking about. Turning around, the queen saw her friend. She was surprised, as she did not expect to see him at such a late hour. The young man looked at the queen intently and said that it was already late. He asked why she was still out for a walk and not sleeping. The queen looked at him in surprise, as she did not understand why he was asking such questions. Cyrano looked at her with fury and asked if it was really a murderer or another burglar. The queen looked at him intently and said with a smile that it was all true. She saw that he was now behaving just like the old duke. She looked at him in surprise and asked why he dared to leave the house during his arrest. The young man looked away from the queen, but did not answer her question. Some time later, they were both walking in the garden. Aroa looked at Tess and said with a smile that her stubborn girl had grown up so she didn't even want to listen to her. Cyrano said that if it was for Her Majesty's sake, then it had to be done. The queen sighed heavily and said that she would deal with it tomorrow. He looked at her closely and said that insomnia was a disease that was not very easy to cure. The queen looked at him in surprise and asked who had told him about her illness. He looked at her intently and said that it could be understood just by looking into her beautiful eyes. The queen was puzzled, as she did not think it was true. She knew that someone could have told him about it. She looked closely at the young man, but she knew that he would not confess to her. She sighed heavily and said that it was most likely just a temporary symptom. She said that on the battlefield she slept perfectly in any position. He looked at her intently and said that the war was already over, and she had won it. Cyrano said that now they would not dare take a step into their country. The nobles who wanted to start a civil war had turned their tails and avoided it. He looked at her closely and said that for this reason her worries were in vain. He said that her heart still wandered on the battlefield, but she should calm it down and let them all take care of her. The queen sighed heavily and said that she knew about it. She understood it perfectly well, but unfortunately, she could not yet realize it. Aroa knew that the war was over. She no longer had to sleep in blood next to corpses, no longer had to kill soldiers of the enemy country who poked them with their fingers like witches. She no longer had to fall asleep to their curses like a lullaby. She knew that now she would not have to lose the subordinates of whom she was so proud. Aroa sighed and said that sometimes she began to miss war. Since it was easily suppressed by force, she asked her companion if he would feel relief if he pulled out all the vile parasites from Babylon and cut off their heads from their shoulders. Cyrano looked intently at the queen and said that if this was what she wanted, then he would gladly fulfill this request. The queen said that she had not expected him to answer like that. She sighed heavily and said that she was not a tyrant at all. She did not want to be one, so she should be patient. The queen looked intently at the surroundings of the royal palace. She wondered if it had always been so spacious. She sighed heavily and said that this was where she met him. Cyrano looked closely at the queen and asked if she meant Kyle LeBron. The queen looked at her companion with a smile and asked what he was talking about. She said that she met him for the first time in this place. He looked away from the queen in embarrassment and asked if she really remembered this. The queen looked into the distance and said with a soft smile that it was simply impossible to forget something like this. She knew that on that day her father had chosen a groom for her. Then she became very angry. She ran past the young man with lightning speed and hit the wall with fury. Cyrano froze, stunned by the sight. A moment later, the wall in front of the young lady crumbled and fell. The young lady looked at the devastation around her with rage and anger. A moment later, she turned to the young man and said that these columns were very thin. She looked at him intently and told him not to tell her father about this. He froze without saying a word. The queen smiled and said that her father had become very angry with her then. She looked at the palace and said that her father always wanted to have hot springs. Cyrano looked at the queen and said that some adjustments needed to be made. The queen smiled as she touched the warm water. He looked at her closely and said that they were lucky, and it would be nice if there was a hot spring in the winter too. The queen smiled and said that it would be nice to have it not only in winter, since it is very pleasant to soak in a hot spring. She said that despite how exhausting the training was, She was able to start a new day with full strength after the spring. She said with a smile that she often fell asleep here, and the maids had to try hard to drag her to the bed. Cyrano looked at her in surprise as a brilliant idea came to his mind. The queen looked at her in surprise as he called her. Cyrano looked at her closely and with a smile told her to take off her clothes and take a bath, as after it she would be able to sleep easily. The queen, in turn, followed the young man. The maids, in turn, sighed with relief, as they were glad that the queen was able to sleep. The queen came to the central district to see the third candidate. The knight, in turn, very loudly announced to everyone that the queen had arrived to them. She asked if it was really necessary to shout about it so loudly upon her arrival. Viperion looked at the queen intently and said that the people must hear of this in advance to prepare their hearts. She looked at him puzzled and asked if he was busy. He looked at her and asked if she would execute him if he answered that he was busy. She sighed heavily and said that she would not do that. He looked intently at the queen and said that she needed to say why she had come. She looked at him with a smirk and said that he had become a very impudent bastard after leaving the battlefield. The queen told him to give her the sword. He looked at her in surprise and asked if she really wanted to fight him again. The queen said that was exactly it, because if she did not torture herself, she would get sick. Viperion sighed heavily and said that if Her Majesty beat him, he would not feel well, but he still agreed to it. Some time later, they still fought a fierce battle. The queen looked closely at the young man, and with a grin asked if he really had time to think about anything else. He sighed heavily and said that it was not like that at all. He looked at her intently and asked if she had anything to tell him if it was so important. The queen said that she was not joking at all when she held the sword in her hands. The young man said that he would certainly try his best. After some time, in the queen's chambers, the maids admired the spectacle and looked at the young man with embarrassment. They were shocked that he came to the queen. They knew that he was the best groom in the entire empire. She looked at the maids and asked with a smirk if they were okay. The maids were taken aback and said that everything was fine and she just misunderstood them. She looked at them and told them to go and get her some towels. The maids left the room in a hurry. The queen sighed heavily and, looking at her friend, said that he was simply a sinful scoundrel. He asked in surprise what else one could complain about when one was tired. She looked at him in surprise and asked if he knew what kind of girls they were. She said that they came to the royal palace before they turned 10 years old and lived with the royal family all their lives. For this reason they giggle when they see a worthy guy, and the eyes that look at him are special. Aroa looked at him intently and asked if Isabel alone was not enough for him. She did not understand why he needed to charm other people's maids. He looked at her in surprise and asked her in confusion why she was talking about Isabel. The queen sighed heavily and said that it was all because of him. The young man looked at her in bewilderment. The queen said that, of course, she needed to talk about Isabel. He looked at her with fury and said that if she had any objections to him, then she could just say so. Viperion asked if that was why she beat him. The queen looked at him with fury and said that she hated to see innocent Isabel being pointed at because of him. She looked at him intently and asked what he intended to do with her. The queen, looking at the young man, said that Isabel was thinking about his family. He sighed heavily and said that he simply couldn't give up, because without her he had no reason to live. With the speed of lightning, the queen struck him on the leg. She looked at him intently and asked if he hadn't just said that outside. She looked at him intently and asked if maybe she should help him and prevent his family from harming young Isabel. The young man froze in place from what he heard. He looked at the queen intently and asked if she really wanted to help him. The queen looked at him intently and said that this was his family. She asked if he shouldn't hold on to her. She smiled and said that she wouldn't do it if he didn't want to. Instead, she would just steal Isabel so that no one would notice until something happened to her, and of course she wouldn't tell him about it. With the speed of lightning, he rose and, looking intently at the queen, asked what he could do. The queen smiled, looking at the young man, and said that he could become her groom. He froze in shock at what he heard. Viperion couldn't utter a word. A moment later, he had already come to his senses and, looking at the queen with bewilderment, asked what she had just said. She smiled and said that she wanted to become her wife. He asked in surprise if she had really gone crazy. The queen looked at him intently and said that he was an unholy bastard. She said that the first and second were already there, and he was the third. Viperion was shocked. Cyrano looked at his friend closely and asked us if he was going to find the one behind everything. Cheshire looked at him puzzled and said that he had not found anyone yet, and also asked if he didn't say hello when he came in. Cyrano looked at him intently and asked if he had found the boy's biological father. Cheshire sighed heavily and asked him if he really thought that this was the kind of information that could be begged from a summoned spirit. He sighed heavily and said that it was difficult to even get close to him. Cyrano looked at him closely and asked if he was saying that he had found out who was guilty. The young man said that was not entirely true, but that he had found the person who was most like him. Cheshire handed his companion the document and told him to look at it. Cyrano looked at the young man in surprise and asked if he had stolen the bank statement. Cheshire asked with a smile why he wouldn't steal it if he had just found it. Cyrano looked at him intently and told him to explain. Cheshire said that in order to take documents from the bank, an identity card was needed. He reached the most secret safe. Cheshire looked closely at his companion and told him to look at the report, since one person had been helping him with money for quite a long time. Cyrano asked if he was really talking about the Guardian now. The young man said that the attack was indeed it, although he did it with impure intentions. Cyrano asked if he had found out who he really was. Cheshire said that, unfortunately, he had not found out, because the safe was well guarded. Cheshire said he should look at the seal. Cyrano was surprised, as he noticed that the seal belonged to Brunhild. The young lady looked closely at the young man and greeted him with a smile. A moment later, she introduced herself with a smile. He smiled and said that he knew who she really was. He looked at her in surprise and asked why they met like this. The young lady looked closely at the young man and said with a smile that she was wondering if he was Her Majesty's favorite. Cyrano sighed heavily and said that everything was not like that at all. The young lady looked at him intently and asked why he wanted to meet her. She said that they could get straight to the point. He looked at her in surprise and said with a smile that she was getting to the main point very abruptly. He said that she did not look at all like the best merchant in Babylon. Vanessa looked at him sharply and said that he was not here to discuss non-business matters. She said she had accepted his offer of a meeting because she thought the old duke would come, not his grandson. She looked at him intently and said that she wanted to make sure of one thing. She said that when her lover became the favorite of Her Majesty, she wondered who was targeting him to use. She looked at him closely and said that he should know about it. She asked if her guess was correct. He looked at her intently and sighed heavily and said that she was very smart. The young lady looked at him in surprise and asked if he had just realized that. Vanessa looked at him and asked if he knew that she was the queen's secret admirer. Cyrano said that of course he knew about it. The young lady thought for a moment and said that it was very interesting. He said that he knew that she had secretly persuaded merchants to supply military goods, and the merchants were looking for everything from army food to foreign weapons. The young lady looked at him in surprise and shock and asked if he had done a secret investigation about her. He sighed heavily and said that it was necessary. She looked at him intently and asked what business he had with her. A moment later, the young man handed her a document and asked her to look at it. He said that a stranger had broken into Her Majesty's palace. We must find the one behind it. He said we must find the one who paid the burglar. The young lady looked at the document intently. She was amazed. She looked at him in surprise and asked if he had simply stolen the report in the most guarded safe. She asked if he really needed information about this man. Cyrano looked at the young lady intently and said that it was for the good of Her Majesty. Vanessa sighed heavily and agreed with him. She said that she would definitely find out about everything and tell him. She looked at him intently and said that she had one condition. He looked at her in surprise and asked what they were talking about. Vanessa quietly approached him and quietly asked him to tell her about Her Majesty's favorite thing. She said that she was not interested in some kind of jewel, but just a symbolic thing. The queen smiled and told her friend that she was coming in like a stray cat. Isabella looked closely at the queen and, sighing heavily, said that she simply did not want to disturb Her Majesty's rest. The queen looked at the young lady and told her to just take off her bulky outfit. She looked at her in surprise and asked what she was doing in the hot springs. She looked at the queen intently and asked what would happen if a man of low birth were to undress in Her Majesty's noble hot springs in this way. She said that people would curse her. The queen looked closely at her friend and asked when this had ever bothered her. She smiled and said that she did not worry about it, but if she had to listen to reproaches, then Her Majesty would not like it either. And she did not like it at all when the queen was upset. The queen agreed with her friend and told her to come closer. The young lady asked the queen with a smile if she could come closer to her. The queen smiled and asked her friend if she could read minds. The young lady said that they were very loud. The young lady looked intently at the queen and asked what she was thinking about. The queen smiled and said that right now the most beautiful girl in the capital was being courted. She looked at her friend and asked what she was thinking about. Isabel smiled and said that she was now serving the greatest man in the capital. She looked closely at the queen and asked if she really liked such sources. The queen smiled and said that she must perform her duties well and her thoughts must be fresh. The young lady looked at the queen intently and asked if it was normal for her to have so many lovers. The queen smiled and asked if she was jealous of her. She said with a smile that she was very jealous of her, the queen asked in surprise, even though one of them was her lover. Isabel said that was a different case. The queen looked at her friend closely and asked if she didn't know better than anyone that they were not her lovers. She said that it was impossible from the very beginning, since Viperion was madly in love with her, and Kylvi saw her only as a ruler, and Ava had a fiancé. The young lady looked at the queen intently and said with a smile that in that case there was only one person left. The queen sighed heavily and said that that man did not count. Isabel looked at the queen in surprise and asked if she had really never thought about renewing their relationship. Aroa sighed and said that it simply would not happen. Isabel told the queen not to look at him as a colleague or a subordinate. She asked her to try to think of him as a man. She said that he was a stubborn man who only cared about the queen's well-being. Isabel said that neither family nor looks were too important to him, but feelings were still very important to him. She said that he was just a fool who would do anything for her. The queen sighed heavily and said that the young man did not love her. The lady looked at the queen in surprise and asked if this was true. Aroa sighed heavily. It was very difficult for her to talk about this. The young lady sighed heavily and said that she had also thought so from her own experience, namely, that it was not love. The queen looked at her friend intently and said that she was just a fool, since the young man was madly in love with her. Isabel said that she was not talking about him, and she thought that it was she who did not love him. Previously, she imagined what feelings she could experience when kissing him. She knew that she was a good lady who should not have such thoughts, so she thought that with him and with other men it was disgusting and dirty, very slippery and wet. The queen smiled and said that such are the lips and tongue of people. The young lady frowned and said that these are completely different things. Isabel thought for a moment and said with a smile that her first kiss with Viperion was very pleasant. Isabel looked at the queen intently and asked if she knew about it. Isabel looked at the queen with a smile and said that if a star falls, the moon will pick it up. She said that's why they say she changes slightly. She wanders around looking for a fallen star, so she rounds up and brightly lights up the world. Eventually, this star changes its shape throughout the year. Finally, like a fishhook, she tilts her body to try to reach the star. Isabel smiled and said that they say it is comparable to the feeling of falling in love. The queen looked intently at the young lady, but said nothing. For a moment she frowned and thought. She wondered what it would be like if she kissed Serrano. She wondered how she would feel then. She knew that even though they had been engaged for a long time, they held hands on their walks and lightly hugged each other. She remembered how they fell together. It seemed to her that he always had a snow-white face. She thought that kissing him together would be incredible. The queen looked away from her friend in embarrassment and cursed. Sometime later, Everyone at the academy was gossiping that the queen had several lovers. They talked about their teacher, the queen's lover, as well as Viperion and Ive. They knew that the young commander had a beautiful lover, who was not inferior in beauty to the queen. They did not stop discussing who would become the queen's husband. The man looked intently at the teacher and said with a smile that he would show him the way. Kyle looked at him in surprise and asked why he was doing this. He said that he could go himself. The man smiled and said that there was no need for that, since the Lord should have received the message properly in the first place, but it was difficult to do so, and Her Majesty said that this was the only way to proceed. The young man sighed heavily and said that since Her Majesty was waiting, he would certainly go. A moment later, they came out into the street and saw a lot of people near the carriage. The man smiled and told the teacher that his students were very nice. The young ladies were simply shocked. They asked the coachman if this carriage would really go to the queen's chambers. Kyle sighed heavily. He didn't know when all this fuss would end. The man looked at the teacher with a smile and said that he would definitely sort everything out now. The man came closer to all the students and greeted them with a smile. The young ladies looked at the queen's assistant in surprise and asked if it was really their teacher, the queen's beloved. Kyle stared at everything that was happening. He was puzzled and he didn't like all the fuss at all. But a moment later, he decided to sit down quietly and leave, since he could not listen to such things any longer. He looked at the coachman and said that the queen was waiting for them, so they could leave quickly. The coachman smiled and agreed with him. A moment later, they left. The queen's assistant was in shock. He did not understand how they could leave without him. The queen looked at her friend in surprise and asked if he had really called all three of them. Cyrano looked intently at the queen and said that this was so. He looked at her in surprise and asked if this was some kind of urgent matter. The queen hesitated and said that otherwise only two would have come. She smiled and said that it was perfectly clear what was happening in the capital today, and the inspirers were not going to leave her office. He looked closely at the queen and remembered his grandfather, who had told him not to tell the queen anything yet. The queen looked at him in surprise as she wondered if he was angry. He looked at her in surprise and asked why she had not asked them. The queen smiled and said that the masterminds were trying so hard that they might be deceived. She said that was not something she needed to know about now. She looked at him intently and said that all 4 people had already arrived. He looked at her in surprise and asked what she was talking about. The queen looked at him with a smile and said that he was one of the 4. Aroa asked why he didn't become her assistant. He looked at her intently and said that if he became her assistant, she would no longer be able to move around as freely as she did now. He said that at the moment he was completely satisfied. The queen looked at him closely and said that there would be a meeting today. She asked if she could not go with him. She knew that he secretly wanted to meet all 3. He sighed heavily and said that he could go alone, and separately from everyone else, he would present her a report. She looked at him intently and asked what his plan was. He said that he would give her a report later. The queen looked at him intently. When she looks into his eyes, it begins to seem to her that he is sighing. Looking at him, she said that she understood him and asked him to act according to such a plan that the whole world would be amazed. At that moment, she did not know that they were actually going to come up with the most original and unprecedented strategy. The young lady looked intently at the professor with a smile on her face and said that she recognized him immediately. The professor apologized with a smile for being late. Vanessa smiled and said that it was no big deal since he was busy. Kyle looked at the knight with a smile. Viperion P thanked him for accepting their invitation. Cyrano entered the room and said that he had borrowed Her Majesty's name to discuss an important matter with them. The young lady looked at him in surprise and asked what he wanted to talk about. Cyrano S said that the Senate was going to make a statement. Viperion looked at him in surprise and asked what the suddenness was. Cyrano looked closely at everyone present and presented them with a document. He told them to look at everything carefully as he received it from the head butler. He presented a document that talked about the preparations for the monarch's wedding. The young lady read the document with fury and shouted that this was simply madness. Viperion was furious because he read complete absurdity. He wondered if it was really the destiny of the one and only queen to bear heirs. Cyrano said that if Her Majesty does not decide on a spouse by the fall, the Senate will intervene and take over the wedding. He looked intently at everyone present and said that they would decide on the candidate and the date themselves. The young people looked at him in bewilderment and asked how this was even possible. Vanessa looked at everyone present and said that this was not funny. She did not understand why the Senate was doing this. Kyle sighed heavily and said that it seemed like they wanted to interfere in the country's affairs. The young lady looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. He looked intently at everyone present and said that while Her Majesty was absent, a new noble council had appeared in Babylon, and the silent Senate began to cast votes. Viperion said in puzzlement that it was like a fight between an old and a sick mongrel in an abandoned house. Kyle said that if the old noble council threatened the activities of the previous king, promoting internally, now this role is taken on by the new Senate. The young men were puzzled, for they had thought that the enemy would be only the new noble council, but now there were two of them. They knew that if the new council pressured the queen with marriage proposals, then the Senate would operate with the duty of raising an heir. The young lady looked closely at the men present and asked what countermeasures they would take. Viperion sighed heavily, as he couldn't believe that there was a fight going on about the queen's wedding right now. He thought that he had better return to the battlefield. Cyrano looked at everyone closely and said that they will walk hand in hand. He looked at those present and asked if Her Highness could stand it. Kyle thought for a moment and said that royal power could not be suppressed. Her Majesty had received the love of the people and the loyalty of the knights, and since the enemies were not idiots, it was not surprising that they would unite. He knew that they were trying to prepare their replacements. Cyrano sighed heavily and said that this would be a very long fight, so they should not get tired under any circumstances. Viperion knew that he would not have been called unless there was a dire need. He said that he had never been involved in politics and had not even thought about it. He looked at everyone intently and said that he had one thought. He said that Isabel once told him that she would not get married because she was not sure that she could love one person for the rest of her life. The young people looked at him in surprise, as they did not understand what he was talking about and what he wanted to convey to them. He said that an idea had come to his mind. He said that he did not understand why their great queen had to choose just one person. The young lady said with a smile that they could choose more than just one husband for the queen. He said that the marriage was necessary for the sake of the heir. Kyle looked at him with bewilderment. The young lady looked at them intently and said that all of Her Majesty's children would be heirs, regardless of who the husband was. She said that some excuse could be made. She said with a smile that it didn't matter how many husbands the queen had. Cyrano looked closely at the young lady and said that it was not a bad idea. Kyle looked at everyone present with a smile and asked if he would really be the first in that case. Viperion sighed heavily and said that Isabel, they will be envious. Cyrano thought for a moment and said that it was not a bad idea, but there was a problem. The nobles would push their children into the husband's place. The young people, in turn, were very alarmed. They knew that the slightest mistake would lead to a dirty fight, and not to the desired result. Cyrano V, in turn, knew that he needed a shocking method to which they would not know how to react, in which it would become a very difficult but equal opportunity for everyone. He looked closely at the young people present and said that he had an idea. All the nobles were surprised and puzzled. They did not know why they were called so suddenly. They wondered what was going on. The queen looked at them with a smile and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. All those present were puzzled. They did not understand why the queen was now in front of them with a weapon. The queen looked at them intently and told them to listen to what she had to say today without objection. She said that they could write down all their objections and submit them according to protocol. The queen said that this was an order and it was not up for discussion. She looked at them intently and said that she would make 4 men concubines. The queen then said that the position of husband would be given to the one who would help her the most over the course of a year. Everyone present was shocked by this statement. The queen said the identity of the heir's biological father would be kept secret. She looked at everyone present and said with a smirk that if anyone wanted to become her lover, she would give him such a chance. She said that her personal quarters were inviolable, but candidates would have a chance at official events. She said that she would certainly build a separate building, but access there would be limited. The man looked at the queen with bewilderment and, in a trembling voice, asked what this meant. The queen looked at those present with a smirk and said that in short, she would create a harem. The autocrats were shocked, as they did not expect to hear such a thing. Viperion read to the queen the latest gossip that was written about her. The queen burst out laughing and, looking sideways at her partner, asked if anyone really believed this news. He looked at the queen intently and said with a smile that she had the same reaction as Isabel. He said that, unfortunately, that's not all. She looked at him in surprise and asked what he meant by that. He looked at her intently and said there was a reason the queen preferred to take concubines. She had her sights set on the unmarried kings of the southern lands. It was written that she intended to go south to conquer and subjugate them, and that the men would be filled with grief. The queen burst out laughing. He looked at her closely and said that it was not a lie, since he knew that as a teenager she had dreamed of uniting the continent in the south. There are young, unmarried kings. He looked at her intently and asked her in all seriousness if she really wanted to unite the continent. She asked in surprise how she could go so far. She asked if she should just conquer the south. He looked at her in surprise and asked how many years it would take her. The queen said with a smile that it would be about 10 years, and together with him she would conquer all the expanses. She looked at him in surprise and asked if he really didn't want to. He said that he would definitely do as she wanted and help her, but he knew that, contrary to all the rumors, she didn't like the war. She looked at him in surprise and asked if he really thought so. She said that people called her war crazy, and every night she had fun with new prisoners and then killed them. She sighed heavily and said that such rumors were circulating about her. He looked at her intently and said that these were just false rumors spread by people who did not know her at all. He looked at the queen intently and asked how things were. She looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. He sighed heavily and said that he was talking about the harem now. She looked at him in surprise and asked with a smile if he was really asking just now. She said that they would make a hot spring in the center and asked if he would like to see it. The queen said that it would be surrounded by columns and decorated with incense, and the men of the harem would gather there in festive clothes like the concubines of the previous king. He asked, puzzled, if that was really her taste. She smiled and said that it was. The queen looked closely at her companion and asked if he was ready for the banquet in honor of the victory of the great Babylon. He smiled and said that, of course, he was ready. The queen looked at him intently and asked if he had anything to say to her. He asked in surprise if he should say that she was beautiful. The queen said that it was natural and the head butler said so. She asked if Isabel hadn't taught him. He looked at her in surprise and asked if he really needed to kneel and kiss her hand. She looked at him with fury and said that if he did that, he would be a corpse. He sighed heavily and said that he did not want to die. She looked at him intently and asked if he knew what she was going to do. The young man looked at the queen in surprise, and she said with a grin that she was going to go hunting. Some time later, the aristocrats were eagerly discussing the queen and her large army. Vanessa looked at all the ladies present with a smile and asked why they were so tense. She said with a radiant smile that they were now at a banquet. She said that the queen wanted to enjoy the victory from the heart, so they should do the same. Vanessa smiled, looking at the ladies present, and said that the queen is currently in a relationship. She asked the young ladies if, in her place, they would not want to show off their lover in all his glory. The young lady sighed heavily and told Vanessa that her fiancé was also a candidate. Vanessa sighed heavily and said that it seemed like everyone already knew about it. She said that she never even thought that she would become a rival to the queen. The young ladies discussed this situation and were curious as to who the queen had chosen as her partner this time. A moment later, everyone was announced about Her Majesty's arrival. Everyone present was shocked as they saw a woman who hated receptions. They saw that the queen was smiling radiantly and, moreover, she was wearing a smart dress. The queen, in turn, looked at all the guests present with a radiant smile. Vanessa froze in surprise, looking at the queen, because she did not believe that she had broken the rules. To herself, she thought that she should have called a portrait painter. The queen looked at everyone closely and said with a smile that she and the generals present there had spent 7 years at war. She smiled and said that they had won. Looking at the generals, she smiled and said that this was a big step forward for their country. She said that now they have vast territories and the strongest knights. She looked at everyone present with a smile and said that even if she called Babylon an empire and herself an empress, no one would dare to contradict her. She looked at those present with a smile and said that today they should celebrate the night of victory and the return home. They looked intently at the queen and chanted her name. They shouted and begged her to accept their allegiance. The young lady looked closely at the queen. She was very happy because everything was going according to plan. She knew that they had all tried very hard. The young man looked closely at the queen and said that for the first time he realized how eloquent she was. The queen said with a smile that Kyle had written the speech, and she had only learned it by heart. The young man, in turn, was annoyed by this news. The rest looked at him and said that the ability to use servants is one of the virtues of a monarch. Viperion looked at the queen with puzzlement and said that first she praised her husband and then calls him a servant. The queen said with a smile that this is so. A moment later, the queen saw the marquis in the crowd. The young man looked into the distance and said with puzzlement that this was very suspicious. The queen looked sideways at her partner with a smirk and said that it was time for them to go. He looked at her in surprise and asked where they were going. The queen smiled and said that they would go dancing. Aroa said that they would slowly approach the marquises while they were waltzing. He looked at the queen in surprise and asked if it would be too noticeable. But a moment later, he said with a smile that he was ready to go dance with her. A few minutes later, the young people were waltzing. With lightning speed, they moved throughout the hall. The queen looked at the marquis with fury. The queen, in turn, was like a huntress. The marquis trembled with fear. He saw the queen's terrible gaze. He knew that if something went wrong, he could easily die. He looked at everyone present and, breathing heavily, said that he should go back, as his blood pressure had risen. Aroa and Viperion looked at those present with predatory eyes. A moment later, the queen pointed to her partner in the direction and said that they now needed to move quickly. He meekly agreed, and they moved with lightning speed, whirling in a beautiful dance. Cyrano looked at the queen intently and said that the new noble council had been ignored by the Senate and had not yet responded in any way. He said that perhaps they were finding out if this was true. The queen looked at her assistant intently and said with a smile that they were lucky. He looked at her and told her not to be so optimistic, as sooner or later the two forces would unite. Aroa looked at him puzzled and asked if he really thought that the old men in the Senate would unite with the inferior nobles. He sighed heavily and said that he thought that would be the case, because then they would be able to resist the queen. He said that most of the nobles were calling for neutrality. Looking at the assistants present, he said that the previous king had fought with the old nobles. They had called for neutrality, protecting their troughs, but now they were silent for the same reason. The queen looked at him in surprise and asked why this was happening. He said that the time would come when the scales would begin to tip to one side. He looked closely at the queen and said that then all the former neutrals would defect to the winning side, retaining their dignity and influence. The queen sighed heavily and said with annoyance that they were just bastards. Cyrano S. said that probably those who are part of the old noble council will join the Senate under the previous city. He said that he does not want to admit it, but the new noble council adheres to the old traditions, so it is better to choose the Senate to protect their pride. She looked at him in surprise and asked if she really had no allies. The queen sighed heavily and said that it turned out that, apart from the chief butler, the chancellor, Cyrano and her skinman, there was no one on her side. He looked at her in surprise and asked why she thought so. He smiled and said that all the people of their country supported her, from the shoe shiners on the street to the soldiers guarding the borders. There was no one who did not support her. The queen looked at him in surprise, as she did not expect to hear such a thing. Cyrano looked at her intently and said with a smile that she was a queen who relied on a sword and was loved by the common people. She sighed heavily and said that, unfortunately, she was not that good, since he himself had just said that she was unstable and often made mistakes. He looked at her closely and said with a smile that it was true, but she had changed a lot since then. Aroa looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. Cyrano smiled, looking at the queen, and said that he would do everything to make sure that everything was so. At the Blake estate, Madame spoke with the Marquis. She said that if the Senate had not recommended that she meet with him, he would not have been able to even enter her house. The Marquis sighed heavily and said that he knew about it. Since they had had a very distant relationship for a long time, Madame said that, frankly speaking, they despised each other. The Marquis pushed some strange box towards her. She looked at him in surprise and said with a grin, "What kind of cheap tricks are these on his part?" She said that she doesn't take bribes. The Marquis said with a grin that he knew about it, and that was why there was nothing inside yet. He said that if she agreed, he would gladly fill the box. He looked at her closely and asked if she really hoped that he had put Isabel's head in the box. The man looked intently at the queen and said with a smile that all 12 members of the harem had finally been selected. The queen looked at him in surprise and asked, "Why not 32? The man was surprised. He asked if she really wanted that many. The queen was surprised. She said that it was not that she wanted such a large number. It was just that there were a lot of requests. The queen looked at the lord intently and asked if they really considered her an animal. Since they were laughing at her on the side, the lord sighed heavily and said that he would punish them after he finished with today's affairs. The queen looked at those present intently, as she knew that the lord was simply the best of the best. A moment later, the queen entered the palace and froze in place. She asked with fury what they had made of the palace. The assistants smiled as they looked at the queen and said that as she had told them earlier in the center, they had built a hot spring. They said they had nicknamed it a work of art. The queen was shocked because it was not a work of art. She thought it was too pretentious, but she did not answer. She looked into the distance and saw her friend, Snow. He looked intently at the young people and said that Her Majesty was now in front of them. He looked angrily at all the men present and told them not to even dare look down on her. The queen was shocked because no men approached. She wondered if these were the men from her harem. She looked sideways at the lord and asked what she saw now. She was puzzled and did not understand why they were all blonde. The lord meekly said that it was because all the applicants were blondes. He asked if she didn't know that there were rumors going around the capital that she liked blondes. The queen sighed heavily, for she knew that this was not so. Snow came closer to the queen and said with a smile that they were very glad to see her. A moment later, all the men knelt before the queen. The queen looked at everyone present with bewilderment. She did not understand why they were behaving this way and who told them to treat her this way. She knew that the young man was supposed to be locked in an underground dungeon. She did not understand why he now had the status of the main man in the harem. Aroa was angry with Cyrano because she knew that it was he who emphasized the need for a harem. She was furious because he brought a guy into her grief who sneaked into her bedroom and also dressed everyone in obscene clothes so that she would die laughing. Aroa barely held back her laughter. She said that she would accept their greetings later, since today she just came to look at the completed work. The maid looked closely at the queen and asked with a smile when she would go to the harem again. The maid said that since they served the queen, they could go with her and teach them everything well. The queen looked at them in surprise and asked what they wanted to teach the men. They said that they would tell them which queen liked massages, how to properly massage her, and what snacks and alcohol she preferred. The queen sighed heavily and said that this should not be done. She knew that it was already funny. The maid said that the head maid forbade them to go there. Aroa said with a smile that the head maid is very scary when she is angry. The lord looked at the queen and said with a smile that she had done a very good job today. The queen smiled and said that he had also done a good job. He looked at her and said that she should still visit the harem tonight. Lor said that he had already informed her that she was going to enjoy the hot spring. The queen looked at the lord in bewilderment and asked what he was talking about. She said, puzzled, that she was not yet ready to deal with those depraved blondes. They only caused her funny thoughts. The Lord said that the attention of many people from the queen's palace was drawn to her harem, and she should take a step now. Aroa thought about it and said that he was right in a way. She knew that she needed to at least take one look at those guys, but in turn she really hoped that she wouldn't choke from laughter, looking at them. The young men looked at the queen intently and said with a smile that they had been looking forward to seeing her. The queen, in turn, looked at them intently. She was glad that they looked better today than last time, and she even liked it. She looked at everyone intently and said that she came because she could not sleep. One young man ran up to the queen and asked her in bewilderment what had happened. The other young man said that he would like to console her. The queen sighed heavily and agreed with them. She told them to go inside and not come out until she called them. She was shocked, as they reminded her of peacocks. She wanted to think about sad things so as not to laugh in front of them. The queen sighed heavily and said that she could now go back and have a glass. Cyrano P. looked at the queen and said that she could not do this. She looked at the young man in surprise, as she did not understand why he was in such a place. He looked at her and told her to follow him. She looked at him in surprise, but did not object. Cyrano said that he and Snow wanted to tell her something. Snow looked closely at the queen and greeted her with a smile. The young man looked at the queen intently and said with a smile that thanks to the fact that he was in charge of the harem, he was the only one with a room on the ground floor with a huge living room. The queen looked at him in surprise, as she did not understand what he was talking about. She looked at the young people with puzzlement and asked what exactly they wanted to tell her. The young man looked intently at the queen and said that he had found a customer who had ordered him to seduce her. A moment later, he said that it was not he who had organized all of this, but rather Cyrano himself. Cyrano, in turn, was surprised, as he did not expect to hear something like this. He looked at the queen and said that they heard from Vanessa. The queen was surprised that Vanessa would help in such a matter. She looked closely at the young people and asked who the customer was. The young man sighed heavily and said that the customer was the Marquis of Bangor. The queen looked at the young men with fury and asked if she had heard everything correctly. She shouted that he was simply crazy. She thought for a moment and said that she was going to teach him a lesson right now. Cyrano looked at the queen with surprise and confusion and asked if she really wanted to deal with him personally. He said that it would be better to hire people for this. The queen sighed heavily and said that she would go out incognito. She looked at him intently and asked if he really wanted to stop her. He, in turn, understood that he could not stop her and said that he understood her. Cyril P. understood that the queen really wanted to get out because she was stuffy in the castle. Snow looked at the queen intently and asked with a smile if he could help her with her disguise. The young people looked at him in surprise, as they did not expect to hear such a thing. Some time later, the queen transformed into a new image. She smiled, looking at herself, and told the young man that he was not at all in this matter. He smiled and said that he had previously worked as an assistant makeup artist, and the queen was surprised. Aroa looked at Cyrano and asked if he was serious about going with her. She said there would be guards. Aroa mockingly asked how he would stand there with his frail body. Cyrano sighed and said that he was not going to arrest anyone. He was just going to follow her. He looked at her intently and said that since she was going to sneak in and all that, then someone should help her. The queen came closer to him and said that even if you didn't look closely at him, you wouldn't recognize him either. But she, in turn, knew that even with makeup he remained a handsome man. He turned his gaze away from the queen and said that if anyone tried to look at her face the same way she did his, he would gouge out his eyes. Aroa looked at him in surprise and confusion and said that he was very ruthless. Snow stared at the young men as they quarreled among themselves. He looked at the queen and said that the Marquis was going to dine with the nobles that day and would spend the night in the salon of his wife's mansion. He looked at the queen and said that there were rumors that he and his wife were living separately. The queen said that she sensed a catch, as she did not understand why he would dare to go to his wife's salon for the sake of the circle. The queen looked closely at her knights and told them to be ready for any emergency. The young men looked closely at the queen and told her that she did not need to worry as they were protecting her. The queen looked at her companion and said that it was time for him to go. The queen approached the wall and touched it. He looked at her in surprise and asked what she was doing. She smiled and said that she was now thinking about how she would climb the wall. He looked at her in surprise and asked what she was talking about. She asked if it was possible to see anything here. She said that there were only workers here. Cyrano was very puzzled, since the building had 4 floors. The queen said that such a height was not an obstacle for her. A moment later, she looked at him with a smile and said that she was going. She said that he should remember the number and faces of the workers here, as well as the nobles. He sighed heavily and said that he would definitely do everything, and also asked her to be careful. With lightning speed, the queen jumped from floor to floor. Cyrano looked closely after the queen, as he thought she had gone out because she was impatient to stretch her legs. The young men stood and discussed the surveillance of the Marquis as his carriage pulled into the Blake estate. The Marquis was furious, and since his friend pretended to be decent and noble and was on their side, he collaborated with others. He realized that the cunning Marquis wanted to get the Senate. He looked at the man and said that he should continue to watch the Marquis's carriage. The queen watched the men closely. She, of course, wanted to hear something else, but she liked this too. The Marquis looked closely at his wife and asked if she didn't want to give him another chance. Madame said angrily that she had already signed the divorce papers. The Marquis was in shock. He ran in a hurry after the carriage and called for his wife. Cyrano watched them from the sidelines. He was shocked because he didn't expect that they were going to get a divorce. A moment later, the queen approached him and asked who was going to get a divorce. He said that he had just seen the Marquis and his wife, and it looked like they were going to get a divorce. She looked at him and said that if life together was a complete tragedy, then it was better to separate. He looked at her intently and said that this was true, and also asked if their case should be considered as soon as possible. She looked at him in surprise and asked why he decided so. He said that after the divorce, the Marquis would not be able to use this place and would look for another refuge, and if they provided him with refuge, it would be easier to keep an eye on him. The queen smiled and said that it was an excellent idea and that the Marquis's wish would be fulfilled in no time. The queen said that they should go home now, since they had to come to headquarters early tomorrow. The queen said that the Marquis wanted to unite with the Blake family. The young man looked at the queen in surprise and bewilderment. The queen said they would like to take Viperion out of the game. The queen asked the lord who was in charge of filing divorce papers. The lord said that in the internal administration, there was a person responsible for reporting on noble culture. The queen said that the lord should tell him that if the Marquise wanted to divorce her husband, then this matter should be considered first. She looked at the lord and said that the division of property should be fair. The queen said that if the husband is the reason for the divorce, then he should be made bankrupt. The lord smiled and said that he understood everything. Kyle looked at the young man in surprise and asked, "Did the queen really climb so high and overhear the conversation?" The young lady, in turn, said that the queen was simply an amazing person. Cyrano S. said that everything is so, and the divorce papers have already arrived, and soon they will be approved, and the matter will be decided. The bankrupt Marquis will look for a new refuge. The young lady said with a smile that in that case she would take over the building. She asked what about a decent building at a low price. Cyrano S. said that he would send his people from there to spy and set a trap. He said that he would send his business partner. He said that to get close to his assistants, it would take a person who knew what was going on in the most remote corners. He looked closely at everyone present and said that they had already covered all the issues and could finish for the day. Kyle P. looked at them without asking if it was the Senate and made his absurd statement. Cyrano said that this is how it is. Kyle looked at him in surprise and asked why there was no reaction. Cyrano S. said that hundreds of newspapers and magazines reported on the construction of Her Majesty's harem, and only one place published the Senate's statement. The young man laughed and said that he thought so. Cyrano looked intently at those present and said that they were waiting. Kyle, in turn, looked at them with a smile. The queen read the article and said with a smile that it was very funny. The lord said that while attention was focused on the harem, she should visit it more often, the queen of the task, but asked if she really needed to go there every day. She asked with a smile what she should do if they looked like sinners and acted like puppies who lacked love. She asked if it would be okay if she just went to the hot spring. The Lord looked at her intently and asked, "How about inviting just a couple of people?" The queen thought for a moment and said that one of them touched her because he wanted to wash her hair, and she hit him asking if he wanted to die. She looked at them closely and asked if this was a consequence of the war. The Lord was in shock. He asked if the young man survived. The queen smiled and said that he simply lost consciousness, but survived. The head maid looked at the queen sharply and said that she didn't think she should really show any interest in them. The queen asked if she should just pretend. The queen thought about everything for a moment. Sometime later, the queen decided to visit her harem. Each of those present watched the queen closely. They really wanted to please her. The queen looked at them closely and said with a smile that they could talk, and also asked what made each of them unique. She said the family couldn't send them here just because they looked good. The young man smiled and said that he played cards very well, and if she would now allow him to sit opposite her, he would entertain her with a game. A moment later, the young people were raising their hands in a rush and talking about their merits. The queen looked at them closely and frowned. She realized that she liked this more and more. She realized that they had already found out a lot about her. She wondered if she could have a good time with them. The queen, in turn, decided to dine in the harem. She decided to take a walk barefoot, as she loved running around the garden as a child. She noticed that her young men also followed her. She saw that they were walking towards her barefoot. The queen realized that they were doing everything just to get her attention. She looked intently at one of the men and asked how he was enjoying himself in the harem. He sighed heavily and said that he wasn't very comfortable. She looked at him in surprise and asked why he thought so. He sighed heavily and said that he felt uncomfortable. The queen asked why. He looked at the queen intently and said that it was all because Her Majesty did not need anything from them. She looked at him intently, frowning. She realized that he was uncomfortable because they couldn't see each other often. The queen looked at him and asked what his name was. The young people were surprised because the queen asked the young man his name. The queen was shocked because she knew that Marquis Snow had rushed to her and that her nephew was still able to push him into the harem. The young man sighed heavily and said that if he were in the Marquis's place, he would also have thought that one of the plans would work. He asked who his nephew turned out to be. The queen looked at him and said that he was an ordinary blonde. She said that she described him as ordinary. Looking at her friend, she said that he was much more handsome than all the blondes. He looked at her intently and said that she spoke as if she had just now realized that he was handsome. She thought for a moment and said that she had realized this long ago. She said that she thought that he was unlucky to be more beautiful than her. He looked away in embarrassment, as he was touched by the queen's words. He looked intently at the queen and said with a smile that the Marquis, who had with difficulty pushed his nephew into the harem, would be disappointed by these words. The queen asked him if he thought he would like it if her nephew caught her attention, and Cyranoes said he probably would. He looked at the queen intently and asked what about the divorce. She said that the documents have already been signed, and now they are dividing the property. He thought for a moment and said that the Marquis was very clingy to his wife, and it would be bad if she took him back. Aroa said that this would not happen because if he did not give her a divorce, she would kill him. Cyrano Yu smiled and said that they would quickly prepare a building for him to rent. The queen smiled and said that on the day of their divorce, she would throw a grand celebration in the harem. He smiled and said that this was a very excellent choice to distract the public attention. The queen smiled and said that it was so. Sometime later, there was confusion in the harem. Everyone served the queen, and the queen, in turn, was very happy. They slowly prepared various dishes over the fire. The queen looked at the men present with a smile and told them to drink with her. A moment later, the young people eagerly began drinking. The queen looked at the young people in surprise, as she did not expect this behavior from them. She was shocked because she realized that they were more fun than she thought. The Marquise was very happy that she was finally divorced. The Marquis, in turn, shouted and begged his wife to give him another chance. She screamed and sent him away, but the Marquis screamed that he did not want to divorce her, since he would soon achieve success. He screamed after her that she should not bother him, since he would soon make her a duchess. The queen looked at her companion and asked if they had deceived the Marquis by saying that the price was so low because the house was haunted. She asked if it had worked. He said that they had become close to the Marquise's assistant, who was suffering from poverty. The queen looked at her friend and said that there was a secret passage inside. He asked in surprise how she knew. He said that there was not only a passage, but also several secret rooms. The queen asked who would watch them. He said there was a suitable person. The queen smiled and said that she very much hoped for good news. Cyrano was puzzled, since Mayor Case essentially said nothing. The queen looked at him in surprise and asked if he was disappointed. She said that they could wait until next time. He looked at her intently and asked if it was true that she liked the Marquise's nephew. She said they weren't lovers, but she only asked his name. He looked at her and said that he had a request regarding the harem. He said that she should show favor to the Marquise's nephew. The queen looked at him in surprise, as she did not expect to hear such a thing.